All right, hello and welcome everybody. Today we're going to be talking with Matt and Jason, and there are a couple other guys who I think are going to join us shortly. And we're just going to be talking about art, game development, a little bit about NFTs, and whatever other stuff people have to ask. Oh, it looks like we've got one more guest hopping in right now. There we go, and we got Andrew here. Perfect. Sorry for sending you the invite extremely late there.
It's okay. I was ready.
Yeah, I messed that one up. Anyway, yeah, so we talk about art, game development, and everything else, I guess, that comes up. So everybody, I think, has met or seen Jason. If you've seen the stream before, you have. If not, well, there's Jason in the other corner there. And then my buddy Matt down there in the bottom left now is an artist, 3D artist, and teaches
That's fine, yeah.
art. And if you guys want to introduce yourselves, feel free to. And then Andrew, I'm gonna let you guys introduce yourselves. Go ahead if you want to say anything about who you guys are and what you do. I think that'll be better than me trying to do it.
Totally. You want me to go first, or?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So my name is Matt Newman. I'm an artist. For years, now I'm a 3D artist. For years, I was in web design for like 15 years until jumping into mobile games and then actual games and then VR pretty heavily. And then most recently, I've been a 3D artist for so long. It's kind of even hard to remember when I actually jumped into it, but I've been getting into kind of like urban vinyls, custom toys, like all that kind of stuff. And now with the NFT craze, it's kind of like there's like a nice symbiotic thing that's happening. So I've been kind of going full bore into that. So, but also asset store stuff, do a ton of that and all kinds of anything 3D pretty much. But yeah, that's me.
Nice. Yeah, and this stuff is really good. Like I've seen a lot of artists work, and Matt's stuff is always pretty damn impressive. Like I'm sure we'll show some of it later or something.
Yeah.
Like, no, I'm not bullshitting. All right. Yeah, Andrew, you want to just tell everybody who you are real quick?
Sure. I'm Andrew. I've been using Unity for almost a decade. I'm getting close to it now. And I fall into that category that many probably of your viewers fall into, where we're still learning and still trying to make cool stuff and learn as we go. I also produce art on the asset store and some scripts as well, working with a bunch of other people to do the art, because I don't do all the art myself. I do some of it with Substance Painter and stuff, but mostly I just produce it and help work with other people to help me get it all up there and help other devs out on the asset store and stuff.
Nice. Yeah, and I'm sure people have seen the Infinity PBR stuff. At least people who've used Unity any decent amount and looked at the asset store have definitely seen your stuff. I'm going to switch your direction so it doesn't look like your guys are looking off into space. Hey, look like
Yeah.
All right. Magic of the internet. Good stuff. Cool. Well, yeah. Anyway, yeah. Welcome, guys. And then Jason's Jason. He's another Jason.
Jason's Jason. Yeah. That sums it up. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. Anyway, I wanted to talk about a lot of stuff today. About just game art pipelines. I was curious a little bit about the NFT stuff. I know that you're working on, Matt, and I have a couple friends who've reached out to me asking about NFTs and games, and if it's possible to make games that have NFTs or games that are NFTs and all kinds of other things. So it'd be kind of interesting to talk about, although I don't know anything really about it, so I probably won't be a very useful part of that discussion. So I don't know, is there anywhere you guys wanted to jump onto first, or anything you guys were really interested in talking about?
Have you guys seen Sandbox yet? You check that out? The Sandbox? Sandbox.game, I think it is.
I don't know if I have. No. Marketplace beta is live.
Yeah, it's essentially like a virtual world that they created. And I actually don't know if it was built in Unity or what, but it's all kind of like Minecraft-y, right? But they were selling real estate, like digital real estate. So they created a land, or like kind of like this world that had different continents and areas, and everybody could buy a piece of it. And like big investors have gotten in on this. Like the Winklevoss twins just bought like, I don't know, like 6 million in there or something. They bought like all the islands around it. And the whole thing's sold out now. You can't buy any of it. It's all completely sold out. And they just opened their marketplace, which is really cool. So if anybody's a 3D creator out there and wants to get in on something new, it's all NFT based. So everything's based on the Ethereum blockchain. So you can build these assets that people can use. Once this world goes live, Sandbox, you can kind of buy these different elements to put in your lands and build your own games. And they have tools to do all that kind of stuff within the platform. But there's a huge marketplace right now. You download their tool set, you can start making stuff and selling it like right now to be ready for when it goes live. So, and it's crazy. I mean, some stuff that's on there, I'm just like, that's just sold for $4,000. Are you kidding me? Like it's crazy. Yeah,
a lot of it seems crazy.
It's like becoming, it just seems like there's been this gold rush in the past, like 2 months in the gaming side of NFT things, where it's like this new, everybody's just jumping on the bandwagon, you know, and it seems like there's a lot of platforms that are coming out weekly that are just kind of being involved with this whole space. So it's really interesting. But yeah, check it out if you haven't. I was looking at it and my jaw just dropped at some of the things.
Yeah, I just loaded it up. I mean, to be honest, like all of these things seem like they're not really adding much value. Like there's no real special benefit of it from what I can tell over just having the game and being able to buy it. Just like the same crap you could do in like Second Life and all the other games where you could buy things with money. I feel like I wonder how much of it is just like a rush from, there's a lot of people who randomly just became millionaires who had no money and now have ridiculous amounts of money, and it's in things like Ethereum. So they're willing to just go spend a little bit of Ethereum because they don't even think of it as money, and they just suddenly went from not having any to having millions, and they're willing to like pay these crazy amounts and drive up these prices, and then kind of like gets other people thinking that they're just going to keep going. I wonder how much of it is that versus like if there's any actual like long-term value in any of it at all, you know?
Well, I think that the thought process behind a lot of it and what's driving a lot of it is, I think you're right. Like a lot of people made a ton of money on, Ethereum and the raises and the gains that it's had so far. But, with this whole NFT and blockchain kind of tokenized artwork and things like that, it's almost like you're transferring your wealth into something, right? Which in then turn, now that thing has value because there's currency that's backed it up, right? And so then it's the next person that wants to buy it. They're looking at, it's almost like artwork in a fine art world, right? You go to an art, you buy something for, $10,000 and that thing's worth $10,000 because you bought it and you've now dictated a price for that piece of artwork. And I think that that's kind of what's happening. It's getting beyond the idea of, I'm just buying something for vanity purposes. Now it's an actual thing and I'm the only one who has it kind of thing. You know what I mean? It's a weird kind of thing to wrap your head around, but it's interesting.
I admit though, from a techie standpoint, I'm conflicted because I love the fact of the culture of what it's doing, because you're effectively democratizing self-starters. We're at a point now where people can monetize. People, like, he's been creating work for so long that he finally gets the cash in on that, on the creative endeavor of what he's doing, right? And I totally respect that it's really good to have a means for artists to monetize their own work. But at the same time, NFT is, at the end of the day, it is linking to content. And there's people, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's already a lot of NFTs that are broken. Like the actual link, they won't resolve to the artwork that you're expecting them to resolve to. And so there is a level of trust required that effectively it's like buying web URLs. And so for me, I still think it's tangibly different than buying art because, you're not going to walk home one day and the art is a white canvas. You can't access the thing that you own, right? As opposed to an NFT, which someday may stop resolving to the link that you think it will,
Totally. And, to your point, I think that there's some interesting things that have evolved because of that. And one of the things that I'm personally doing, and some other artists have done too, is so I'm more in like the figure space, right? I focus on creating like, figures and things to put on your shelf that look cool, right? And there's a lot of artists that are in that same space. But with the NFTs, what they're doing is they're creating a digital version of that thing. So you own that. But then if you buy the NFT, we'll send you the actual one too. So you have both. And then there's like this extra value associated with that. So now as you sell those NFTs, you're also shipping around this physical thing that goes with it, which kind of like has a tangibleness to it. I
have heard that. That's what excites me the most about the concept is I was watching something and they were talking about how in future you could have companies which have a limited drop NFT system of like 20 of these particular whatever they are, it doesn't matter. And then the idea is you need to have certain amounts of them, and they act as like gated keys or tickets to like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, right? And
Totally.
you end up now having this thing where the cache is the act that you have to either find someone who's willing to sell one or suddenly trade them in the same way that people used to trade whatever Beanie Babies or Pokemon cards. It becomes this like limited, interesting thing to trade in. So I really like the idea of it. I'm just hoping that the technology can hold up to its expectations.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think we all are. Totally.
Yeah, my expectation is that I'll just miss out on it completely, and a bunch of people will make a ton of money. And yeah, I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah, where's the
That's
NFT
fair.
programmers?
It still confuses me. Yeah, like the code I can get. The rest of it, I still just get lost. But cool. Yeah, so you've been making. You're just talking about 3D models and 3D like printables, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was just curious, like, is there a big difference between making those and just 3D characters for a game? Like, when you do it, do you just take like a character that you made for a game and convert it, or do you like want to start that as a completely separate process? Is that kind of
So
I'm just curious what that's like.
I think from a high level, it all kind of starts the same, really. I mean, you're in ZBrush and you're making something that looks awesome, right? And then from there, which way do you want to go with this? Do you want to print it? Do you want to optimize it for printing? Do you want to optimize it for cinematics? Do you want to optimize it for video games, right? So then it's kind of like the pipeline evolves. It almost feels like ZBrush is like where it all begins, and then it's kind of like, okay, we're going to go this direction. Is it for exported for 3D printing? Do we, how do you want to manage this asset and change it as you go? Personally, for me, I think that's kind of cool because it really sets ZBrush, I think, at the top tier of where everything kind of begins, and then it kind of goes from there. And not just ZBrush, it could be a variety of tools. You could use Maya and Blender and ZBrush all together. But to have that high-res asset is kind of where it all begins, right? And then from there, the sky's the limit. You just kind of choose what you want to do.
So I'm curious because I understand the pipeline for games because I've worked in that stuff and I understand making low poly versions and whatever. But one thing that always interested me is I know that when you're creating models to create practical versions of it, you have to deal with like scaffolding the model so it's not going to like destroy itself when you're making a resin build or something. So
Totally.
I'm curious, is there much you have to do, or is that something that's done post model that you have to sort of scaffold around it, or are you sort of, will you take that as a design consideration for like a large hammer or a large weapon if you think it won't hold up for the build you're making? Is that ever a consideration?
Yeah,
it's for the printing, right? Like the plastic scaffolding that holds the print together.
Yeah. So when you're dealing with like resin models, a lot of times, depending on the complexity of the model, you're breaking that model up into manageable parts that are going to lock into each other. Usually I go through a process like for actually, hey, this dragon right here, right? I don't know if you can see it, right? So this was done with like, I don't know, he's about like 27 parts. So the wings are like 3 parts, because I know that if I tried to print that, it would just be a nightmare if I tried to actually, if you want to
hold that guy up.
Bam, right? If I actually wanted to print some of those pieces like, singularly, that it would just be too much for the printer or whatever, or there'd be too many supports in general, and you're going to have these like little knobbies all over it. It's not going to look great. So you kind of want to manage those pieces. And there's a whole science behind 3D printing, like which way do you want to orient it? So where there's always going to be one side that's not going to look as great as another side. So if it's the front of the model that you want everybody to see, then the back of it's probably where you want to have your supports and things like that. So in that phase, you're kind of just breaking up every piece into basically pieces that are going to lock into each other. You're creating keys inside ZBrush and voids to make sure everything kind of glues together appropriately. But then when you export out those pieces, you're bringing it into a slicer. There's a couple like Lychee's, the one that I use, or there's I forget the name of the other one. There's a ton of them out there, but that's where you create your supports, and that just does that pretty much all automatically. But you can optimize them and change them in there and things like that. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it's cool. It's just always fascinated me. It's something that I remember the first time 3D printers became a concept, and it's like it's the first time it bridged the gap in that direction. Because I've worked in VR and AR, and that's all about taking digital content and manifesting it into our world in some way. But going the other way has always fascinated me. The idea that you could just have something digital, and it's one thing to go hire a company to mass produce some product for you, but to be able to just press a button and just bring something into your house that you designed yourself has always been very cool.
Totally.
Yeah, I still need to get a 3D printer on like my list of things that I just need to find a place to put. I think it would be a lot of fun. I'd sit around and print stuff nonstop.
I have a story. So this 3D printer back here, this guy, I had this whole setup in my garage where I was doing all my resin printing, which is something you usually need like a garage for because it's kind of smelly, it's dirty, resin gets everywhere, and didn't realize that it was on a platform, kind of one of those Craftsman like roller things, and it was too close to my roll-up garage door. So one day I had my garage door closed and I went to open it and it grabbed the Craftsman thing and it threw it up in the air. And so this guy, resin everywhere, like, I mean, total disaster. It's completely destroyed. And also the sun hit it. So all the resin like inside on all the gears is all like, solidified. So now it's just my problem.
Well,
Wow.
it looks good. At least there's that. It does look pretty cool back there.
Oh man. That's cool. So if I was gonna get a 3D printer, is there one you would recommend, by the way? Or does anybody have a recommendation?
There's so many. I'd go with either the Anycubic or the Elegoo. I'd say the Eleguu's been, for me, the Elegoo Mars 2 Pro or the Saturn, which is the bigger one that just came out. Those have been like rock solid. Like I haven't had any, unless you like drop it all over the place like this one. But other than that,
keep from dropping it, I think. But I need to come up with like a list of things that I want to print so I can make the justification to my wife, right?
Well, one thing that sold me is it's never been. I have like the artistic talent of a dead ferret, so I never expected to make anything fun with it. But I did think I saw somebody do this, and it really like clicked with me. Is people were making various stands and holders. So I've got a mounted of headphones, I've got a bunch of VR headsets, a bunch of VR controllers, and I know somebody who's like made custom mounts and holders and things that they could stick on the wall where everything fits nicely. And it's like, now that's something I could do. That works for me as an excuse to get one. And I keep like bouncing back and forth about whether I should.
Yeah, I've thought about the same thing: holders and adapters and like making cool models. But then I remembered you have to paint them, and like I can't paint either. Like I can barely hold my hand still.
I'm still waiting for 3D printers to be able to print like an entire iPhone charging plug.
That'd be perfect. Oh, that'd be good stuff. So you're talking, I guess we talked really quickly about the 3D art pipeline for games, or Jason mentioned that he knew what that was like. And I thought it might be interesting since we got artists and people who know art here. Maybe somebody explain what that is to just anybody watching who doesn't know what the art pipeline is. Like, say you're an artist and you can make a model, maybe like you're learning how to make art. What's the pipeline or like the process to actually make something for a game? Like, what would you say like somebody would need to know and like go through to make an actual character or like a vehicle for a game? Or let's just say maybe like start with something simple like a prop. Maybe they just want to make like a crate or something like that. What's the pipeline for that? And then maybe like a character. Anybody want to take that, jump on it?
There's so many directions it could take. I mean, I think now I'm only speaking from my own limited experience, which, take that, but get Maya, right? And go the professional route and, learn how to use ZBrush and Maya and get that workflow down, bring it into Substance Painter or something and texture it, rig it in some fancy application, bring it into Unity, have it animated there, bring it into Unity, and you're set, right? But depending on what you're trying to make, you could also model stuff in Unity with like UModeler or Pro Builder or something and animate it in Unity and use just flat textures in Unity. So sky's the limit, I think. And I think that's what's exciting is that if you're just looking to make cool props, depending on what style you're trying to do, you might be able to just do everything with free tech inside Unity and not have a huge steep learning curve there.
This would be like more of the low poly, like flat textured type props. So there's a lot of the stuff you see is pretty popular, right?
Yeah, that like all the low poly, that style. I mean, there's no real texture. Sometimes there's a few, different shades, but the textures are just flat colors. So as long as you've got an eye for color, then and the shape, the form, the silhouette is important at that point as well. But there's art there involved. It's not just slap it together and you've got something golden. You've got to be an artist still, but it's certainly an easier pipeline than learning Maya, making sure you've got 3 buttons on your mouse and all these other things.
And if you're not artistically inclined like myself, another option is to kit bash things from the asset store, which leads into the fact that Andrew here makes a lot of exactly these kinds of models. But the second thing is once you get those assets, you can always modify them yourselves, right? You can open it up in some editor tool and then start, make it different enough that you still get the benefit of all of the legwork up front by people who know how to do it correctly. But then even just modifying the textures alone can be enough to give you a vastly different look and keep the kind of thematics across your project the same. So you can get like 10 different models from different creators, and providing you're willing to put the time in to either find a texture artist or to, do it yourself and match all of the content, it can look very cohesive. It's just don't kit bash stuff from vastly different styles and try to think it'll look good. It won't. You need to do some kind of smoothing of the edges.
It's funny you mentioned that. I've been getting a lot into VR sculpting lately. So using like Medium, yeah, some of the other tools that are available. And it seems to be like, it's very stamp based, kind of that modeling where you're essentially loading in kit bash libraries and just going to town with them. And you can make some really killer stuff that way, like stuff you never thought. It's almost like kit bashing is becoming like mainstream now with a lot of these tools. And
it's not just for art either. Like there's Dreams, Dreams on PlayStation.
Oh yeah,
that's like kit bashing, but for game creation and level design. The amount of cool stuff you can do, and I mean, let's be honest, that's basically what Roblox is as a concept. It is just kit bashing the game. So it's really cool to see that there's a culture of creativity built on reusing other people's stuff and sort of remixing them in different ways.
Totally.
In a way, would you agree that Unity and the like are in a way kit bashing code, in that you've got all this different code already made and you're just slapping together, how can I use this component with this component?
Yeah, I would say that's how I make a lot of my game projects.
That's probably how most artists make their games.
It.
Combine one asset with another. I know quite a few artists who don't code at all, and they do essentially that, and then they just get a programmer's help when they get stuck with a little bit of things here and there. But there's just a lot of different assets to build stuff, and they still make really cool things because they can do all the art and the animation and stuff really well. So the final product ends up looking really nice. It's just under the hood, it's a little scary, but it still works.
I think it's a common misconception too. A lot of people seem to think that you're either, if you're a programmer, you'll buy all your art and you'll write all your code. And, if you're an artist, you'll make all the art and you'll buy all your code. But I find that like, it actually works much more of a mix. So for example, just because I can code, it doesn't mean it's sensible for me to write every single bloody line myself for everything I'm doing. Like character controllers are really complicated and, messy things to make. I'll probably pick one up off the asset store if I'm building a project. So it's not just if you're not a programmer. Like realistically, if you do a cost benefit analysis of how much work it'll take you to do something versus spend $60 in the asset store to basically save yourself 3 weeks work, it's often like it's not just artists that are using the kind of the kit bash code solution. I'm more than happy on certain projects to just grab a chunk and say, hey, I just don't want to deal with this problem. I'll just like take someone else's solution and then, throw a boundary line and away I go.
Yeah, I think almost every programmer is doing that too. It's a bad idea to not do that, because a lot of the times those systems are just going to be way better than what you could build in that amount of time. They're going to get updated and they're going to account for all the edge cases that you're not even going to think about. So
yeah, that asset was probably someone's life for like a month. They just like, it's all they were eating, sleeping, and breathing. And so do you think in a week of you trying to solve some small edge case, you'll hit all of the solutions they would have come up with,
And sometimes the assets like their entire life, it's just all they do. It's like their full time, their company is the asset.
Seen that too many times. And there's some really good ones where you're just like, it makes sense that this is your life.
Yeah, I mean, like Text Mesh Pro, right? Like, before that was built into Unity, that was like you weren't building a better text thing than that. It's the easy obvious one.
Pro Builder was the same way. Pro Builder was that guy. I think his name was it Gavin or something, like Gabe or Gavin was making that. And
Gabe.
yeah, Gabe. And he was, I'd see him all the time at the GDC and stuff. And he was working on it, showing it off and showing the games that people were using with it. And then Unity was like, why don't we have this in our editor? It's
I
like,
unironically think that was the best thing that was ever added to Unity, because I came from UDK back in the day. That was that UE3's kind of free version of the engine. And my favorite toy learning to program and learning to make things back then was the BSP brushes. So that's, for people who don't know, it's like you make a geometric shape like a rectangle, you make another shape, and then you can subtract one shape from the other. So you're basically modeling by sort of addition and subtraction. And so if you had no artistic skill and you didn't have Maya installed or whatever, you could still like build up a level through just careful geometric clipping things together. And I was so frustrated when I started using Unity, because I was like, dude, you giving me a circle, a sphere, and a capsule. Like I'm not creative enough. I can't do anything with this. So having the ability to like put floors down and press a button and generate a staircase, that was like, that made my day. They finally added that.
Totally.
Same here. Yeah, I just stopped bugging artists all the time once that came out.
That's the key there, right? That just being able to get done what you want to get done, because unless you're actually, let's say, unless what you're enjoying doing is building that world or building that script or whatever it is that you're doing, unless that's what you're here to do in your project, your real goal is probably to finish your project. So anything that can get that project finished faster is probably a good thing.
Totally. Yeah. I remember, using Pro Builder for just collisions. Like that would be the thing I would open up to make all my colliders on all my geometry. And because there used to be, interesting kind of edge case scenarios in earlier versions of Unity where like the baking wouldn't quite work a certain way when you're trying to bake pathfinding and stuff. But if you could use something like Pro Builder to create those navigatable meshes, it was a way better solution. And that was how I initially got started with that. And it saved so much time because I could visually just kind of put the meshes where they needed to be in the level. And then obviously the pathfinding got much better in a lot of the baking tools, but and Pro Builder got killer as well.
Did you ever watch the video, the E1M1 creation in Pro Builder? Have you seen that?
No.
So I think it's on the Pro Builder website. They literally make the original E1M1 level, all of the parts, and they use the Pro Builder shapes not only for the geometry, but they also use it for collision detection and for sort of for doors and things as well. So that they'll have like odd shaped doors and corners, and they'll use the Pro Builder shapes, like you're saying, as trigger boxes and collision boxes, and they do all of the cute tricks that for people who don't know, if you've got a game where you're running around very fast, one of the worst things you can do, that you can see this in 2D games, is when your geometry clips into like a wall and you stop dead and all of your fun momentum is gone. So back in the older days, what games used to do is they would cheat. If you had like an L-shaped corner where a door frame would be, the actual geometry collider would be across that. It would be basically, you would slide off it rather than hit it. And so they were using that as well, where there was invisible colliders over the kind of rough edges, so that if you just threw yourself at the corner of a wall, you'd still smoothly bounce around, because that was the gameplay style. So yeah, it was really cool. It's a bit dated now, but like he makes the entire level, goes through the whole thing, and shows the floor blueprints and stuff. It's well worth a look if you're interested in sort of seeing someone who built Pro Builder and knows how to use it properly to build something impressive with,
Yeah. Oh no, that's cool. It worked really good for when I used to do mobile games back in the day. For like, this is when iPad 2 like came out. I was doing like 3D stuff, and you had to really optimize your colliders. Like you couldn't use all the geometry in your level, or else it would just grind to a halt. Like, and it would just it'd run at like 15 frames a second. You'd be like, what the hell's going on? But if you use like you said, basic kind of colliders and a lot of things where you just cheat. If you've got something with all these different outcroppings and whatever, just have a piece of geometry go through it, and nobody cares really. It's still fun, right? So yeah, I totally hear you.
Yeah, I mentioned in the chat there, the UModeler is also like Pro Builder. It looks purportedly to be the exact same thing, but it's an interesting. It's not Pro Builder, so it's paid on the asset store, but it's got some really cool videos that look quick and easy to create almost anything, especially in that low poly style.
So I'm a bit conflicted on that one too, because I saw the video, I was equally impressed. I bought the asset and I gave it a try, and it's really cool. But the problem I have is, again, like this was like a couple of years ago, maybe a year and a half. So it's probably very different now. But at the time there was zero documentation, and the tools didn't have the polish that Pro Builder does for the like buttons and the tooltips and all that. So I sat there for like 2 days just going, I don't know what and especially when I don't have any of the native understanding of 3D modeling tools. Like I know basic terms like beveling. That's the basic thing I can do. So when it comes to like the problem with UModeler is it seemed to feel like the tools may have been quite quick to work with, but they expected you to know what you're doing before you use the tools. And that was something that really, I just went back to Pro Builder. That's just extrude, magically align to everything for me. That keeps me fine. So maybe you'd have met better luck than I would.
I've never actually used it myself, but I think you display a very good point. If it works, it works. And sometimes it's easier just to work with what you know than learn the new thing that might not save you time in the end.
Yeah, I might check that one out. I haven't actually seen that. I think I might have seen it a long time ago, but I've never tried it. So I'll have to give it a shot. I just linked it in the chat too for everybody who wants to go see what it looked like. The video looked pretty cool. I was watching it while you guys were talking about it.
It's funny, Jason, what you said. I had the same when I initially saw that. I was like, oh man, this looks like a better Pro Builder. I need this. And I remember, I mean, this was like 4 or 5 years ago, I think, when it initially launched. I remember downloading that package, playing with it, but there was like zero documentation. And I was so frustrated. I was like, it looks like it can do a lot, but I just can't. I was like, back to Pro Builder, back to Maya, like everything else. But now there's probably tons of documentation and it's probably great. I just haven't had the time,
Yeah, so I will say that's one of my biggest frustrations about things in general with the asset store is, so I love the asset. I love the fact the asset store exists and there's tons of great assets. But the problem is, most people make a tool for themselves and then say, hey, this could be an asset. So they sort of smooth the edges, put it on the store, and then they think the job is done. It's like, no, you've released a product now and you have to maintain it. You have to help people understand how to use it. All of your inherent knowledge that you have because you've been working in the code base doesn't transfer. People don't have any of that. So there's a level of sort of empathy for the user that you tend not to get as a programmer. And this is coming from experience. I didn't have that for years. I've told a story before about how I used to work on banking software, and I used to just like, click at my screen. I was also isolated from the world, didn't mean anything to me until I saw other people being trained on my software. And I was sitting there awkwardly in the back of a presentation room going, oh my God, people use this. People are like daily being taught where the buttons go. And it really made me think about making tools that are easy to understand and use for the first time. So I think a lot of asset store developers don't make that connection between themselves as a consumer versus them releasing an asset, because they're like, oh, it's cool, just go, it does cool stuff, go buy it. It's like, why? You haven't told them why they should buy it, what it does for them. You haven't made it easy for them to integrate. You haven't solved a problem that they might have. And yeah, it drives me insane.
I think when it comes to those, I would add to that a lot of people, and this is not a slight on people, but a lot of people don't necessarily know how to use it. And while, like I'll be creating some script, I just recently released some scripts in my head. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, you can use it for this. You could do this. You could do all these different things you could do with it. And then I'm thinking, nobody's going to realize that. They're going to look at this code and be like, what the hell is this? This doesn't make any sense. So my job as a publisher then becomes, okay, I need to release this, but also release demonstrations, release like a whole scene on how to make this into a localization system, how to turn this into a inventory system, how to turn this into whatever it might be. Because oftentimes, it's just difficult to visualize how you can use some random bit of code to make some finished product or system.
See, it's really funny you say that, because I have only tried to make an asset once. This was like 5 years ago. I put an asset to the asset store and it got declined for that reason, because I thought it was really cool. I built what I called a point generator. I called it pointedly or something. And effectively what it was is I had a bunch of algorithms for generating all the points along a sphere or along a torus or along a line and all this stuff. And the idea was you could use it for bullet hell generation, for pathing, for all sorts of cool things. But my assumption was, look, it generates points in any configuration you want. There you go. Figure it out. And it's like, no, people just, nobody understood what the hell it was. And they're like, no, this doesn't seem like an asset. It just feels like code. And they were right. Like I was completely wrong. I didn't understand there's a difference between code and like an actual value proposition of an asset.
Yeah, it's definitely got to be super easy to integrate. I mean, I remember I started using Unity and started grabbing assets, and I was terrible at it. And I would just email asset creators constantly, especially the ones that didn't have very much documentation, because you get stuck on things and not know how to use it. And it was it was not good. So the one time I released an asset, I was like very careful to release like a ridiculous amount of documentation. I've recorded a video explaining like what every line of code did and why it did what it did, and like it's like here's how you do things with it, like step by step, to try to like minimize it, and made all that like available before they even got it. So yeah, it's I can imagine the support on code ones just being a lot of work.
Oh yeah, it's even the same. I think with 3D models, you get people going, "Yeah, this is great, but can you add an animation that does this, 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 and this?" And you're like, "I could, but I would rather not and work on other models." You know what I mean? But you can hire me on the side to make those for you or something like that. You know?
Yeah, and the worst is it, like I've seen that too, where you see comments where people are downvoting an asset, doesn't have the like backflip sidekick thing that I want for my project that nobody else in the world would need. It's like, dude, you can't downvote some asset creator because they don't have this one thing that you want and would add no value to anybody else.
Pretty much.
Yeah, in my experience, though, if you reach out to the artists and you do want those things, if you're willing to pay for them, like they're usually happy to make them and just add them to their asset, right?
Totally.
At least I've never had anybody say no. I've asked them. So.
I don't think I've ever said no, actually.
Yeah. Hey, because you're basically getting paid to improve a thing that you're selling. So
yeah, and I think it's interesting too, because it's almost like it's an advertisement in a way for the artist, right? It's like if you make something cool and somebody likes it and uses it, and then they want more, then it's kind of like you now open this channel to, you know, a piece of income that you can use with somebody, right? So it's funny. I teach on the side, and I tell a lot of my students that I'm like, you know, start making these assets and getting them out there, because it's really like this is your doorway to, you know, getting jobs, getting work, getting side income, getting that side hustle going, like all that kind of stuff, you know?
Oh yeah. If I was an artist, I would just make and release assets constantly.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people just like they release things and like they don't do very well and then they give up.
Totally.
Instead of just like constantly releasing. I would just be like release a new asset every week, you know, forever.
Yeah. I'm often jealous of the people I work with who do the modeling and the animating, because I'm the same way, where I'm like, I would just spend every night after work doing cool new characters and props and stuff. Instead, I have to pay people, so it takes a little bit longer and costs a heck of a lot more. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, that's the same thing, because that's if you enjoy doing it, right? If you enjoy doing it and you're probably then pretty good at what you do, then why not pump out content and make it, you know, over time, it's going to grow most likely, and make some money at it, and then maybe you can quit your job one day.
Yeah. And there's a great bit of advice in general for any creator that like I keep somewhere in the back of my mind at all times, which is you don't get to decide which of your work is popular. I love that phrase, because it's so true that you could pour your heart and soul into like 6 months working on something, and then as a joke you do something in a day, and then it's like that thing that took you no time that you don't care about is suddenly the thing that's going to, you know, outperform everything else you've ever created. So it's usually, that's why they say it's a numbers game. It's not just because more things give you more chances, it's because you don't know whether all of that effort's worth it. And so you're better off making lots of things, seeing what people gravitate towards, and then build more. Like people always talk about that low poly asset set on the asset store. They didn't start by building 5 million low poly asset packs. They built a few different things. The low poly one like took off, and they're like, well, guess we're tripling down on this exact concept because people liked it, right? So it's always better to diversify the ideas until you see where the real winners are.
Totally.
There's also just time is another thing, right? It doesn't take 1 month, right? It takes sometimes years. And for someone who's able to pump out, like when it comes to art, you can release a lot of content. You know, like there's on the asset store, there's people who have like hundreds of models, like Proto Factor has like 200 something characters, which is insane. But that's what he's been doing for 10 years on the asset store, right? But that time, I mean, even if each character you pump out only makes $40 a year, if you make 200 of them, after 10 years, you're making a lot of money, right? I mean, it's just a numbers game at that point. Time and effort times, you know, whatever many people buy it. And yeah.
By the way, Protofactor is a good friend of mine, and he started. I remember when he started, and I remember he started doing it, and he had like, I don't know, probably like 20 models, and he was doing pretty good. And he started releasing one, and he's like, I'm just gonna do this full time. I'm gonna do it like every other week. I'm gonna release like 2-3 models, and I'm just gonna go for it. And I was like, all right, man. And then now I'm like, man, he has like an empire. It's awesome. It's awesome.
I remember you telling me about him a long time ago at one of those meetups.
Oh yeah, he's killer. He does really good work too. He does work. I think that his stuff is used everywhere. I mean, so many people use it. Really good stuff. Really, really good stuff.
So there are a couple questions in chat about assets and art stuff. I figured I'd just pop a couple of them up. The first one is just about if there are any books you guys recommend for asset creation. I guess it would be for like arts and assets. And I would say don't just limit to books. If there's books or like sites online or anything that you'd recommend to like, I guess, get started learning to make art assets.
I don't really recommend any books. I mean, I never really jumped into the whole book bandwagon on things. It was more just kind of getting into the software. Doing YouTube, I would say, is probably your best friend if you're trying to learn how to do specific things. If it's characters, like, I mean, there's so many tutorials on there how to get started, but really it's just like taking the time and doing things. Yeah, I saw you mentioned the Gnomon workshop on there. That's a pretty good online video resource. There's like a ton of like chapters and workshops and things to do on there. It's funny because actually back in the day, I got the Gnomon DVDs when they used to release those before.
Yeah, me too. I'm one of those people who I as much as I have no artistic talent, I tried, I learned, and I've said before, I think it's endlessly valuable to learn what everyone else's fields are. So even if you're not an artist, you're better. It's good to know what it takes to do certain things, because then you're better equipped when you're asking for favors from people, how much work it's going to take, and it's great for hiring contractors and so on. And so I did the entire deep dive on how ZBrush works and how to do the NURB modeling stuff. And I'll never do it. It's never my thing. I'm terrible at it. But I like knowing how to optimize models and, how to print out the different depth maps and stuff. And it's fascinating to me to know that process. And so I'm a big fan of Gnomon Workshop and a few other places like that, just because it's like a TV show where you're smarter afterwards, right? Like it's well worth, even if you're not going to do it, it's worth learning it just to know your own industry better.
Well, it's also interesting too. I think if you dive into ZBrush or Maya or any of these programs, when you first do it, you're going to be shown a way of doing things, right? Like this is like how you do it, right? From some artist who has their perceived way of doing a specific task. But like any software, there's like 5 different ways to do the same task, right? And you'll kind of learn your own way or your comfortable way of creating things when you just dive in and start doing it. That's why I always say, like, don't worry about reading like the process. Just start doing the process, like following along with the video, do it yourself, because you're going to find your way that's comfortable to make that specific thing happen, whether it be a roundabout way that's probably not the best way of doing it, but it works for you, like whatever, right? You just got to get comfortable with the software. I think that's there's always like this thing, people, they always feel like so afraid or so overwhelmed at first to even jump in and start doing stuff, but just take the dive, just get in there, do it,
I will say too, well, there's a small note on that, which is the other side of it too. You make a really good point about the idea that everyone has their own way of doing stuff, and it's really fascinating that no matter what field you're in, if you meet other people doing the same kind of work as you, their workflow will be vastly different than yours. And so that's a really good example of why I honestly recommend people do try to do some work in an industry, as instead of just being 100% self-starter and do your own work. Because if you ever find yourself in a position where you're the only person who's ever teaching yourself, you're missing out on a lot of opportunities. And so from my experience, like I've worked in enterprise companies. I've watched other developers do things they're far smarter than I am. And having someone else to look at and watch what they're doing is really valuable. And I find that if you're in a position where you're only teaching yourself, it's a great way to start and motivate yourself and get going. But if you can find somebody that you can like latch onto to learn things from, you'll always have that other perspective and why that's a valuable thing. And it makes you think about your own decisions. So if you have an opportunity to work with somebody, even if it's like a lower pay cut or something, I would say take it, just purely for the knowledge you're going to get out of that experience.
Yeah, totally. You never want to be the smartest one in the room, really. Then you're just not going to go. There was another question about drawing tablets. There are actually quite a few questions popping. I'm trying to read through them all, but I don't think I'll be able to keep up. But there was another question about just like hardware and getting set up. And this is something that I've always wondered about too. Because I've considered getting one a million times, thinking maybe it would just make me into a good artist. You know, it's about how helpful is a drawing tablet for art creation in like Blender or even like I'd say Photoshop too. Personally, for me, like I've considered many times getting one of those like little ones that kind of flips down that I could sit here and draw and design on. I just am worried that like I'll do it once, realize I'm terrible at it, and it didn't help at all. So
I'll be staring at the embarrassing purchase in the corner that got 2 uses.
yeah, that's my concern. So I guess everybody else, more on the context of assuming that you're actually doing art though, and that you're going to continue to make art regularly. How important is this stuff?
I would say that it's super important, especially if you're on the art side of things. Like, and you know, it kind of goes to, well, what kind of art are you planning on making? I think is the first, you know, kind of thing you have to answer to yourself. If it's 3D and you want to get into like high res sculpts and things like that, it's pretty much a necessity. Like I can't envision you just using a mouse. I know there are the odd artist out there that just uses a mouse, but I think that, you know, having that pressure sensitivity just makes life so much easier, especially, you know, you think about practical sculpting and digital sculpting and how much like the two, as long as you have that tool to do something, it's going to go a long way. But with that being said, you know, depending on the type of artist you are, like right now, it's crazy how my kind of production workflow has completely changed. I used to do everything on like a really expensive Wacom, right? And for years. And then that Wacom got old and big and it just sat on my desk, and new tools started coming out, and I gave other tablets a chance and tried different workflows. And so now for concept art, I used to use Photoshop for everything, but now I think pretty much exclusively I use my iPad Pro to do all of my concept art before I get into my 3D stage, because it's so convenient. It's just like you can take it wherever, you can sit on the couch and do a nice piece of concept art and then export it out to your computer. And then I go on my computer now, where I've actually changed to an XP pen. I use like a 20, I think I get the 24-inch XP pen I have on there, which was infinitely cheaper than, you know, a $2,000 Wacom. And it works pretty much the same. I think there's maybe some minor discrepancies here and there. But when you're doing sculptural work, it's negligible unless you're doing like really fine detail artwork. I think.
Yeah, isn't it just like the pressure? That's the one thing I look into them, and basically they said as you go up, all you're either getting is higher resolution screens or the more sensitivity with the pen for the most part. And realistically, 90% of people are not going to be like drawing individual hairs. You know, you don't need that level of.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's really more for the organic stuff that you're going to be using your pen for, as well as texturing. Whereas if you're doing like hard surface stuff, if you're doing like robots or, you know, anything that has hard surfaces to them, you're probably going to be using more of your mouse, I would say, to do a lot of that kind of work. And maybe even doing it in other softwares and bringing it into ZBrush and just kind of tightening it up and things like that. But that's kind of my process. And I'd say it's funny because with the price of an iPad Pro and an XP pen connected to a computer, for those two devices right there, it's basically the cost of one really high-end Wacom. So it's kind of like, you know, I don't know. I think you're getting more value out of using multiple tools, and, you know, you can do a lot more with it. But it's kind of crazy. Like even lately now, I've been really into the iPad Pro, just because I like to just chill on my couch and do work, right? So now I've got, God, of course, I can't remember the name of the sculpting app I'm using on my iPad. Hold on one second. Let me Google it real quick. I don't have it in front of me. But I do high-res sculpting now. You can do on your iPad. And it's really, really good. Like, oh yeah, Nomad. That's the one I started using. Nomad's incredible. Like you can texture, you can basically create a full character on your iPad just by hanging there. So what I'll do is I'll do my concept art in something like Procreate, and then I'll move it over to Nomad, have it as my background image, and then I'll start sculpting a 3D model just like I would in ZBrush. It's crazy how they're like emulating a lot of the same tools. And it's like, I'm like, this is like, I'd much rather do this than like go in my office and be like hunched over my computer doing stuff. I'd rather just, sit there on the couch and bust something cool.
So this is funny. This is one of those. So I did a VR podcast for about 2 years back in the early days of the Oculus Rift, and one of the things that kept coming up was why is the adoption not at the rate that all of the fans think it should be? And it's kind of, it was like repeating the same talking points. Was you have to take into account the barrier to entry that is the setting up of all of the hardware, and a lot of people are playing games to relax, and as much as it's a much better experience in a lot of cases, sometimes you don't want to take out the like 15-part suit and all of this stuff just to get into VR. And I bring this up to say that people see this for gaming, but they don't think about it for their own creative process. And if you've got any kind of creative process where you've got a pipeline or some stages of work, you will find yourself choosing not to be creative if it takes too much effort to get started in doing it. And so there's a great talk by Brett Victor called Inventing on Principle, and he talks about how we have a lot of barriers between like creative idea in our head and manifesting it into reality. And you will be more creative as a person the more of those barriers you can get rid of. And so, for example, if you're an artist or a painter or you draw, then you're used to drawing, and the idea of opening up the app and then trying to translate your drawings into mouse movements onto the screen can often be the barrier to like not wanting to do it or not opening up the app. So giving yourself back that sort of freedom of just grab an iPad and scribble on it is not just useful as a tool, but it's also, it'll make you more creative and you'll produce more content. So this goes for any creative field. If you're like writing a book and you find yourself that you've got an app on the computer and you have to turn on the computer and go to stuff, you might write less than if you just have a notepad by your bed. You may not use it all the time, but having it there means if you do have an idea, you won't decide, I won't bother, it's downstairs, right? So always remove those barriers between having an idea and manifesting it into something.
Yeah, I even do that with recording YouTube videos. Like, try to make it as easy as possible. I got it down to a single button I can hit to change all the things over and get it ready. Because otherwise, if you have to go set everything up every time, I used to have that with a green screen. It was like a nightmare, and I'd have to like hang lights every single time before they recorded the video because I couldn't leave them hanging in the middle of the room. My wife would kill me. Right? And I have to like go reset the green screen every single. It'd take me like a half hour to an hour to set up every single time, and it definitely.
That's why I've got these Elgato lights, because I used to have the big stand lights that I'd have to like walk around my office, and I hated doing it. I hated having them up. I wouldn't do video content because I'd have to be like, I'll have to go and set up the lights again, and it would just make me create less stuff. So I paid for the more expensive Elgato lights, and now I can just like press buttons and lights go on and off, and my life is
the light turns off and hit it again and it turns back on.
Yeah,
I'm gonna have to get those Elgato lights.
Yeah, it works great with their Stream Deck. They've made like the Stream Deck, and they just started making a ton of accessories that link up with it, so they can play on everything.
I have the Stream Deck. I'm gonna have to get the lights now too.
Well, that's what I'm pressing. Actually, this is what I'm pressing here. Stream Deck on my table. That's what I've got.
Yeah, same here.
Oh wow, that's cool.
Yeah. I also bought the Stream Deck when I was like, oh, I should start streaming stuff, even though it's not necessarily the thing I really want to do. But I bought the Stream Deck. I use it now to switch between Unity and Rider. Instead of using the dock on the Mac, I just click the button right here and go to Rider.
Nice. I feel like every guy just bought it because they saw like it was a keyboard with buttons that you could change the picture on. Like, exactly. I can make this do anything.
It's really cool tech. Yeah. It makes
cool
things easy.
It's not just for like the fancy Elgato ecosystem either. I've got a Philips Hue for the house, like just the house light bulbs are all Philips Hue set up. And so I've got a light above me that is more my like, because I don't want to work with two giant beaming lights in my face. So I only use these for streaming, but I use that one for when I'm working. And so I wrote a little script that connects to the Philips Hue, and that you can control that from the Stream Deck as well. So I actually have alternative other light sources all combined into the one. So it's like light above me, light wall behind me, which are LifeX, Philips Hue, or the Elgato. So again, it may seem like sort of a silly tech thing, and to a degree it is, but I can't stress enough that like a lot of this stuff is often the barrier difference between me doing something and then saying I couldn't be arsed and doing it. So it's not that you need all the best fancy tools. It's that if you're finding yourself stopping yourself being creative, sometimes it is worth investing a little bit in this stuff.
Nice.
Oh yeah, I just love weird tech stuff too.
Oh, yeah.
With it. I got mine running through Home Assistant, but I'm terrible at setting that up. So just have a
I
couple
totally-
buttons that actually work.
I totally got the Stream Deck because of the pictures on the keys.
Yeah.
That was me. I'm like, yeah, I can change it out to whatever.
Like the first week or two, like actually making his own icons for every button and like going really fancy with it, and then getting fed up with it and just going back to the default ones afterwards.
That was me. There was another question about assets I thought was kind of interesting about how you decide whether something fits your technical requirements when you're picking out an asset from the asset store. Like you go grab some models, and how do you like decide if this is good or not? I mean, I kind of know how I look at things, and I've seen people make some accidental purchases on the asset store of things that were never going to actually work in a video game, or that weren't going to work in our games. So I'm curious, like, you guys have
That's
any like
architectural
steps or
good too, by the
process?
way. If you're ever buying any models that are houses and stuff, pause and just read very carefully, because there's a ton of like really high poly, mostly unusable, fantastic looking 3D buildings that have have not been thought about for game use at all. So just always double check that for like buildings and stuff.
I think
You're talking about looking at like the poly counts, right?
Totally. I think one of the things you really need to look at is, do they have levels of detail, right? So if a model's out there, is it a high res model, but does it have like LOD levels where it could possibly be a mobile model or something like that, depending on the LODs that are there? Or personally, me, I just hate going through the whole building stuff for level of details because I'm lazy when I build models. But I build a model that's kind of like in the middle of the road, not too high poly, not too low poly. Could work on mobile, could definitely work on AAA, and looks good enough to kind of like pass for AAA model. That's kind of where I sit, I think, in my realm, because it's quicker, it's easier, and you can get it done, and everybody's happy, and it'll work on everything. If you can, maybe look for assets where they show it working on a specific device or have a demo or something like that, just so you know you're not gonna get something that's just totally a throwaway.
But let's live in a world where there's tons of really great like depth map stuff. Like you can take a really flat surface model and just bake in a load of detail into, the shader stuff. Like there's some really clever optimizations that can be done that sometimes don't require you to build the most fancy model in the world.
Totally. 100%.
I for someone like, even though I produce art, I don't pay attention to Polycount beyond just making sure it's not crazy high for our stuff. Because I know, one, you can make LODs with tools. There's tools out there that'll take a character or any other thing and make LODs. They're not always as meticulous as if somebody spent hours making it perfect, but it's going to pass for most projects, 90%, 95%. But the thing that got me when I was making my first game, my only game, The Barbarian, years ago, using art from the asset store, and this was probably 2014 to 2013 when I started, and iPhone 4 was out, and by the time I actually finished the game, iPhone 5S was out or something, and it ran perfectly fine. When I was struggling at the beginning, thinking, "Oh, gotta optimize," and then all of a sudden, when it was ready, the phones that people were using were perfectly fine, and tech caught up to my lack of ability to optimize.
Yeah, I had the same experience with the iPhone 1 and then the 3GS. Like, we have to make it work on the one. We have to make it work on the one. Then the next one came out, like, okay, yeah, nobody cares about that one anymore. Like, oh.
That was when I was doing that game, that Grave Stompers game back in the day. It was on iPad 2, and it was a third person kind of shooter through graveyards, like killing zombies and stuff, right? And it was a challenge to get that thing running on the iPad 2. I mean, like optimizing like out of control. But then the iPad 3 came out, and it ran like butter, So it's like we optimized for one, but then we reaped the gains on the next version because it just ran so much smoother. So I think there's.
I will say though, to play devil's advocate, you've all three of you have given an example of when the technology made your life easier for the step up. But if you were hypothetically, like in my scenario, working on PC projects, and then VR gets popular and all of your clients want VR based work, and all of a sudden everything you do is now massively too expensive in terms of poly count and overdraw, and everything you do now you have to relearn so much optimization stuff because all of the devices are moving to mobile and they're being double rendered for each eye. It's like all of a sudden, great, now everything I do has to be hyper optimized far beyond than it ever was before because VR is the new thing,
and baked. Everything has to be baked. Everything.
Yeah.
No real-time shadows
Do
at
not use
all.
real-time lights on VR ever. Just don't do it. Don't. Yeah.
I get you. That's funny. God, I remember baking. Like I was learning baking techniques back in like iPad 2. And I think starting with mobile, honestly, is the best way to start developing because you're going to learn so many optimization techniques that carry through to anything, especially now with VR. You need those techniques. Like you have to use them. The same ones you used on mobile, you are now work great for VR because, like you said, everything's double rendered. And if you don't follow those, like baking all your lights and using things like light probes and stuff, the experience is not going to be the same, and you're going to have a huge hurdle going back and optimizing.
And even like little things you don't think about. Like the one that drove me insane is true blacks in VR always look terrible for starters, so just be careful of that. And secondly, thin lines because of the way the lenses work and the aliasing. Like you just can't use small lines. So if you're doing like a cool matrix grid effect, you're kind of screwing yourself unless you're aware of how thin those lines are able to be. So there's tons of these little VR specific nuances that get really frustrating. And what's really cool though is you also learn tricks that you would never have realized before. Like I was working with an artist who to cut down on all of that cost, we didn't use baked lighting at all, and we didn't use the reflection or light probes. We just painted fucking shadows onto the textures, because then you just have a texture that renders and it's like, cool, let's just turn off lights altogether. Depending on the kind of project you're going for, these things are like, that's so much more performant. It's great. It's like you can cut a lot of problems out.
It's funny. I use that technique out of Substance Painter, and I've actually been asking Substance for years to provide this type of export functionality. But what's interesting is if you're in Substance, right, and you put lights in there, you can go to the 2D view of your model and like your UV map set, and it'll actively show what you're looking at in the 3D view. So you get like a lot of those little little light edges and shadows and all that kind of stuff that you wouldn't have on your model if you just exported it out with the PBR textures. So what you can do, and what I would do for mobile stuff, is I would just screen capture inside Substance. I would zoom in and I'd get all that beauty detail from like the shadows and even the materials, the way they render, all that stuff. Make it a texture map and then bring it into Unity.
Yeah.
And it would have all that in there. And you could kind of fake it where you're like, that looks like it's like next gen. I'm like, yeah, it's literally just, there's no lighting on it, but it looks like it is, and like the chrome, like that chrome look, you could bake in a chrome look to something and it still looks kind of like chrome inside, even if it's moving and it doesn't really kind of follow line. People don't care at the end of the day, and it's optimized and it works. And I've always asked, I've submitted that at least 5 times to Substance. Like, can you just have like a mobile beauty export where it just sends out the snapshot of what's in the UV space? Because that would be killer. But yeah, I think the hack is going in there and just kind of cropping out that whole UV thing and then using it as a texture map. That's so funny.
I love those like super hack stories that people come up with. I remember I was watching a video on Gnomon Workshop where they were talking about pro tips for optimizing things, and one of them that really stuck with me forever is they were demonstrating this really cool scene where everything's raining and you're like, oh, this is I think it's Unreal 3 at the time, and it's like, how are they having all of these particles and it's all this expensive stuff? And then they demonstrated how they made it. It's a 2D plane. It's not even a particle system. It's a 2D plane of a scrolling texture of rain. And then they just layer like 7 of them and then flip it. And so you've got this grid of rain textures, and then they just plonk it on the player's head. Done. It's like, and I looked at it and went, now that I know what it's doing, I can kind of see where it falls over, but I wouldn't have unless I'd like literally seen how they did it. And so it amazed me. It's like they replaced this really full rain simulation with like 8 rectangles of planes of just some texture, and it's like so smart. These are like the little things that are the optimizations that people come up with.
Oh man, yeah, you start getting really creative. That's why it's always I'll preach it, I think, forever. It's just like, start with mobile, because you'll come up with all these hacks and different things that honestly carry through to so many different types of development. Like once you learn how to develop for low-end mobile devices, and that's the thing too, you have all these companies now, like you said, like earlier you were saying, Andrew, how you made your Barbarian, but then when the other device came out, it ran better, right? But one of the hurdles you'll come up with, I think, with that is there's still like millions of people with that last device that haven't upgraded, right? So you have to still account for them. So it's like you're almost still stuck developing on that last one, because you already know it's going to work better on the next version, right? But you're like, but how do I get it to work for these guys, right?
So this the whole hack solution of that. This is another one. We started doing this for VR, and it's like it's exactly that problem. So if you've got a VR platform and you're building some big fancy thing that displays on the Quest 2 or something,
Yeah.
you're going to get some clients who are like, I just want this to run on. I want people to be able to experience this if they don't have a Quest, and so you can just bake out 360 videos of whatever experience it is you're doing, put it up on Vimeo or something, and it's like, for you, that's such a small thing to do for a huge value proposition for the client to say, look, the ideal optimal way to experience this is the VR headset and whatever, but we can also give you a version that you can just link to on any device, and you can like swipe through it on the video and stuff. And so these are the things where if the answer is, how do I make this render on this like Google Cardboard, the answer is, don't. Make a video that renders on Google Cardboard, and like you cut that sort of that off. It's, you don't try to make something that fits on every single device. You realize where the barrier is, and you give them like a different experience that's not ideal, but like fulfills the requirements.
Totally. That's so funny. I remember when when the 360 videos were first starting to hit, and that was kind of like the big thing. I'm like, well, like there's free tools in Unity that you can literally just bake out a 360 video with, and people were just mind blown. Like, you throw it up on YouTube 360, and I even did a couple talks on how to do it, and people were just like, their brains exploded. It was just like, yeah, this is like kind of, it's pretty easy to do.
There's interactive versions now too. Like there's apps where you can put in a whole load of 360 captures, and then you paint hotspots invisible on the screen.
Yep.
And then there are buttons, and you can just navigate through it. Like, we've done museum tours that are entirely like an interactive museum space where you go to multiple different rooms and look around, and there's all this stuff going on. And it is a full Unity project, but like, if you don't have the full Unity, the ability to run that, go to the web version, and you'll get like 70% of the way there.
That's nice. Very cool. Very cool. That's so funny. Some of these comments are cracking me up. People are just like, I never knew you could do that kind of stuff. I'm like, oh yeah, you learn.
There's a great series of books for the programmers out there to learn about optimization things called Game Programming Gems, I think the series is called. And there's like 12 books or so in the series, if not more. And they're just like stories from the trenches of devs going, we were building for this game's console, we had no texture memory left, so we like split off the color channels and baked certain things into certain color channel textures. Also, we could reconstitute it in memory. Like, all of these like crazy stories of how you squeak out these bits of performance on each different platform. It was very cool.
Oh man, I used to work with some guys that they were from like kind of the Sega Genesis Super Nintendo days, like with cartridge days. And there was only so much space in those cartridges, right? And the stories that these guys would tell about, how they were able to fit like, certain parts of games and all those little like techniques they'd use. It's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. And then sometimes they'd go in. That's one guy was telling me a story about how he was working on a game, and he went in the game, they had to do one of those like double cartridges because there was too much memory in the game, and the company like lost it, and they were like, we gotta like build like one of the extra one, like it's crazy.
Well, one of the great examples of this too is, so you see some people have fan projects where they retexture a game, and so there's a couple of them out there where they're retexturing games like Zelda Ocarina of Time. And what's really funny is when they started doing that, and they were like painting walls going, yeah, let's do a cool like higher resolution version of this wall, they'd suddenly realize certain enemies and characters, half their skin is weird and wrong because they're actually reusing the same portion of texture for like a piece of cloth on clothes, as is also a corner tile on a wall, because it's technically just the same whatever arrangement of pixels. And so once you realize that, you're like, well, shit, I can't just paint each texture into a higher res version anymore, because some of this stuff is like hyper optimized and being used in 15 places. So you actually have to learn what each texture does to try to find a way to upgrade it that doesn't ruin all of its uses at one time.
Oh, totally. I think one of the hacks I would always use in mobile games was, if something wasn't running, it was probably textures or something that was really killing it. And there was a couple of apps on the App Store where you could kind of bake it all into one texture map. So you'd have like 4 textures, but it would make them 512 and put them in like a 1024, like all in like a big grid. And all of a sudden, boom, you're getting huge draw call gains, like out of control. And you're just basically merging it all together. That would always be kind of my last resort kind of thing, but it would work. I
mean, like, take the original Mario, right?
Yeah.
Goombas are just retextured mushrooms, and the clouds are the same as the bushes. They're literally the same thing, just repainted. Like the amount of duplicates of stuff. If you actually start watching it, you're like, oh my god, there's so few textures here than I thought there was.
It's awesome. Oh man. Oh, there's a question. Getting approached by a 3D studio to do tech art, and I've only done tech art for web and phone games. Not fully sure I'd fit in. Is there a lot of overlap between technical artists or both? That's an interesting question. I'd say that, well, technical art, like, I guess you'd have to be a little more descriptive on what exactly type of technical art they're looking for. If it's things that are programmatical, you might have a difficulty if you're trying to actually script things. If it's that kind of tech art, I would say that there's going to be a huge learning curve and you're going to have to learn stuff. But if it's more just technical modeling, then you might be okay. It just depends on, I guess, how deep they want in the tech art realm. Because there's multiple avenues, everything from, do they want scripting for mocap? Do they want, like what kind of technical art is it really? I think you really need to define that. Then you'll be able to kind of narrow that down a little easier. Technical art's pretty broad. So just a heads up on that. Yeah.
Would you recommend just looking at the studio, like the actual games, and see what types? I think you'd want to look at like what the games are they're working on or what the project is, and what the pipeline for that type of project would be normally, and make sure that you've got that stuff down and ready. I mean, I would still go for the job, but prepare.
Are they looking at, do they want like a particle artist? Is it just somebody you're just doing like insane particle effects or custom particle effects that, you're going to have to write some scripts to make some things happen? Like, is that what they want? Or is
we got a follow up here. Pipeline tools. Art pipeline and tool stuff, but the history is more in web stuff and doing 2D, it sounds like.
I know nothing about tech art. I would just say this is a great opportunity to learn something new if it's not something you already know. So take the job, get paid to learn something new.
There you go.
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah. And just start researching and learning as much as you can about the job and the requirements, and practicing before you interview and talk to them, or as much as you can.
Yeah.
I can honestly say I have had job interviews where I have Googled the company, found out what they're doing, found the buzzwords of stuff I'd never heard of before, spent like 4 days learning some various stuff so I could go in and I could just safely talk around the topic enough that I kind of sound like I know vaguely what I'm talking about, with the hope that I think I can learn it in the next 2 weeks between now and the time I actually start working on it. And it's worked. Yeah. So I would recommend trying at least.
Keep it fresh. Like, keep learning about it until you interview. Right?
Yeah.
Don't just spend a day on it and look at it. Like, just be all over that stuff until you get the job, and then even after you get the job, so you can do a good job at it.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the industry, right? It's like never stop learning. Like the tools are just always changing and always evolving, and you're constantly going to have to learn new things. So it's kind of like, maybe even throw that into your approach. Like, there's new tool sets coming out that can handle this, and I've got a handle on it. Maybe stuff that they don't even know about that they need to learn about. Like maybe like you said, do your homework before you go in, right?
All right.
Totally.
Okay. Going through. All right. Sorry, I was muted for part of the time I was talking to.
Yeah.
Yeah, tech art's interesting though. Like it always seems to be like a very different skill set depending on where you're at too. Like what the actual tech artists are doing. Like they seem to be focused on whatever the thing is that specific game needs, and it tends to vary a lot.
Totally.
I think that's one of those things too, is that like I remember when I first started learning programming in general, and I heard about different aspects of jobs. So there's there's tool developers, and there's general system designers and software architects and all this stuff. And I just assume that these are like rigidly defined categories, but in general, they tend to be more of a hint at the sort of things you're working on. But oftentimes you're kind of dancing around a certain topic. So I don't know about anybody else, but from my experience, at least, I find that some of these roles depend, like the company themselves, when they're asking for a certain job, may not actually know the real definition of the job that they're hiring for. They just know they need this thing because think about it. If you're hiring someone, it's because you can't do the thing in a lot of cases. So if you're hiring for somebody, they're like, oh, we need a technical artist to do technical art stuff. And so it's usually worth at least finding out what they mean by that. Like, what are they actually asking for you to do? And yeah, so I don't know. It's an interesting area, and just like titles versus what the job actually entails.
Yeah, I'd say a lot of the time too, if they're small, they might just want an artist who can do everything and isn't going to need help with technical issues that they run into. Okay? Sometimes that's just the case where they just want somebody who can make art, get things done, and then help if there's a problem, or not be stuck constantly because they don't know how to convert this model or import something or rig something right. Like they have a good idea of how to do all of the job. They also sometimes just be a lead artist too. They kind of very, very often overlap. Yeah, there was a question about 2D stuff though. Is 2D dead? Most games and cartoons are in 3D nowadays. I don't know, that was weird. Like, obviously 2D stuff's not completely dead, but if we're talking about on the asset store, I would think
the amount of people who are like waiting pins and needles for Silksong to come out will highly disagree with you that 2D is dead. Everybody wants the next Hollow Knight, so I guarantee you it's not dead.
Yeah,
no, but I think that if you're making stuff, you probably want to be in 3D, right?
I think you really have to be kind of a jack of all trades now, right? You need to be really versed in your 2D and your 3D. You're going to excel in one or the other. But, nowadays 3D is being used to kind of rig 2D models like all the time, and it's kind of like you really need a fundamental knowledge of both to be able to do it. You mentioned games like Hollow Knight and things like that. Like they use a lot of 3D rigs in their 2D assets, right? They're just kind of splining everything together and layering them on the Z-axis to create different effects and stuff. But you kind of have to know 3D to do a lot of the things that are happening with 2D. But yeah, it's I'd say it's not dead at all. No, because there's so many like really cool 2D experiences. I still a whole retro revival like stuff you're seeing, all the indie games that are out there. I mean, I love 2D games. What was the one I was playing last year? Was that Dead Cells, like forever? I think.
Yeah, I played like 50 hours of that game.
Yeah,
very good.
I just couldn't put it down, and that was like a killer 2D game.
You keep unlocking new weapons. You're like, well, now I have to do another run, so I just got some new weapons I have to try out.
That game was like endless. It just kept going. I was like, it didn't end, right? It just keeps going, right? Is there an end to it? I wasn't sure if there was.
Well, no, you beat the boss and then you cycle back through at the start again, and then you do that a bunch of times, and then you eventually get the ability to unlock the harder difficulties. But it's the same. Yeah, you keep going, keep unlocking more stuff.
Game was great. It was brilliant. It was a brilliant game. But the style of that, like the 2D pixel art style, the way they did it, it was really killer. Like I think 2D is probably even more hot now than it's been.
I like a lot of 2D games. I just wondering, like, for actually getting a job, like as an artist, though, do you think there are a lot more 3D jobs or more 2D jobs, or is it kind of even?
I think for VR, it's 3D, right? I mean, the VR is pretty much all 3D, but I would say depending on who you're interviewing for, right? It would be either 2D or 3D. There's a lot of 2D studios. Although I will say, there's a lot smaller studios that are doing 2D stuff, right? So you're not going to get in a big team of people. If it's a mobile game company, though, it could be, there's a lot of mobile game companies who exclusively still do just 2D stuff. And if they're doing things like match threes and things like that, right? Those type of games, tons of 2D art opportunities in that, and huge teams of like 50 people working on 2D stuff all day, right? But if you're hoping to get in some really cool, indie style game, then it's probably like two guys, like two people working on it, right? So yeah, it really depends. Really depends. I would say the best approach is learn both and get good at both.
Yeah, and it's not like it's one or the other that's that hard. Like that's the other thing too. It's like I the amount of times I've gotten the question, how hard is it to make games for VR, and do I have to learn all this stuff? And I keep repeating, making a game is making a game, and then the VR stuff is the extra concerns as to the platform you're on. But it's not like you throw away all of your knowledge and then go and start something new. It's like 80% of it's the same principles. You just have to be more aware of things like scale and overdraw and that kind of stuff. And the same goes for all of this. Like, I never understood this mentality of like, there's 2D games, there's 3D games, there's VR. They're not. They're games, and then each thing is a way for you to tell a story. Like, people talk about how games are there to tell a story. Well, books tell a story, but games do it differently, and movies do it differently. They're all different mediums for the same thing. Movies are more about, it gives you a better ability to visually display emotion than books do. So use the right medium for the right tool, right? And if you're making a game, maybe the game you want to make, it doesn't require 3D. Thomas Was Alone was a story-driven game specifically about, can I make an emotional story with a bunch of rectangles? That was the goal. So 2D is perfect for that sort of example, right? And so, I don't know, like, there's no such thing as X being dead. It's just like, there will always be some vision or some project that wants one thing over another, and just learn all of them. And they're not, it's like with programming. Once you learn how to program, learning new languages is kind of, it takes less and less time with each new language because you've learned all of the rules and logic beforehand. And so just, yeah, nothing's dead. It's fine.
Or, you know, are you a UI artist? If you're a UI artist, you're probably all 2D, right? So depending on like the discipline too, are you a graphic designer? You want to work more on menus and things like that? Like, tons of opportunity for either.
And a lot of the enterprise apps too, the same way. Lots of 2D stuff.
Oh yeah, totally.
And really, from a, you know, strictly like, hey, I just want to make a cool project and I like 2D, is that going to make me money if I release my indie game? Honestly, the number of pixel art games out there now, like, more pixel art games come out every, I don't know, I'm just making stuff up now, but every 3 months than the entire Nintendo NES library. You know, people have the world at their disposal here, but they're making games that look like they came out in 1992, you know?
Yeah. Because retro sells. People love retro. People love the days that they used to play their Nintendo.
What's old is new.
That's what's really interesting too. I was watching a talk that was describing the trends in collectors, and so they were talking about how there's different eras of collectors, of people collecting NES games and SNES games and that kind of stuff, and the cost of these games were getting higher and higher and harder to find because they're the collector generation. But now, as people my age who grew up predominantly on N64s are starting to turn into collectors and have disposable income, this is now the wave where it's the N64 generation that is, the games are harder to find, the collectors are starting. And now we're just beginning to see the edge of the original Xbox and Xbox 360 collector stuff coming on, because that'll be the next generation who have their nostalgia for their thing. So it's fascinating how, like, people who are making games who are old enough to make a game now are going to make the games that they played when they were a kid. And so you're going to see a lot of this cyclical, every X number of years, the next generation makes the next cycle of games.
Totally.
That's
so funny. I've noticed that too. It seemes like, yeah, it's almost like the retro scene is starting to kind of move along the years, along with the lines of like, you know, how things evolved in gaming. That's so funny. It's true.
And I was guilty with everybody else. I mean, I've got over here.
You see like pixel art games,
like, collector Zelda from when I was a kid. You know, like, I do exactly the same as everyone else.
Yeah, right. That's awesome.
I wish I had some old ones. The oldest thing I got is my League of Legends disc from when that thing used to be in physical form at the store.
Oh man, I remember that.
And I went and bought it at Target. I went and bought the beta version at Target because that was what you could buy.
I have all my old NES games and Game Boy games. They sit in the drawer now, and I figure, you know, one day they'll be worth like $200 each.
Yeah.
Like 30
yeah. I used to have all of mine, and then I don't know, I think I moved too many times and everything kind of disappeared except for a random train set from when I was a kid and like a couple broken Transformers. Like, you have like half of Megatron, you know, the old one where he actually looked like a shiny silver gun.
Yeah.
There were a couple more questions that popped up, I guess, that hit while we wait. I don't know what happened to Jason. So one was about just
from
the
your
ratio.
experience, what is the most common ratio between programmers?
Yep, that one. Programmers, designers, and artists. Did you disappear too?
I think he froze. I'm still moving.
Okay, down to 2.
From my experience, it's 1 because that's just me. 1 in the asset store is that's how many.
Yeah, I would say in my experience, I would say it's a relatively even ratio, like 1 to 1 to 1, like 1 artist, 1 designer, 1 programmer. And then as you scale up, you'll probably scale up programming first, and then art, and then design, then programming, art, design. I've seen it usually be right around like a third. I mean, sometimes it's a little heavier weighted towards design than others because it's a lot cheaper to get designers in, and you might need to put a lot more content in later on in the game. And earlier on in the product, it might be a heavier weighted towards programmers, where like maybe you're at 50, 25, 25, and then you end up like 50% designers near the end. And then there's also another 25% of people that we're not even counting here that are doing all the other game development things, the production, the support, management of stuff, and all of the other stuff that happens at a company.
Would it change depending on the type of project, like thinking like Blizzard versus, I don't know, some smaller studio that's just doing 2D or match threes?
Yeah, I think you're gonna end up like with Blizzard. You're like on WoW, you're gonna end up with a lot more game designers, right? Or like probably on Hearthstone, you're gonna end up with a lot more artists because you've got to draw art for every single thing in there, and you probably have less designers. Probably about equal programs. I don't know, but I would bet like WoW has a much higher ratio of designers because they're just constantly adding in content. They're probably not adding in as much art and very little code. Right, and then they've got their programmers on other teams. So yeah, I would expect it to vary a little bit, but still to be relatively equal for most projects at least. And then some projects that are just small and it's like one or two. I've seen plenty where like it's just an artist and a programmer and they're both doing design, or one of them is kind of leading the design side too. Which is always interesting. I've never been good enough at two things to be able to do that myself, but I know people who can.
Certainly out of necessity, I think for small studios, especially folks who are just like, hey, I'm going to make a game with my friends, certain jobs have to get done, right? So somebody has to do them. And maybe you're not the expert at game design or level design. You're not, but somebody's got to do it. So, hey, optimization, Sally, can you do that? And you're just like, yeah, I guess I can figure it out, more or less.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I learned how to do a lot of the things that I learned how to do. It's just from being stuck having to do them. And so it looks like Matt got kicked out for some reason. I'm gonna send him another link again.
Yeah, I mean that's literally what happened with me. With I, as a single person just trying to make a game because I wanted to make a game using the asset store. I was like, well, shoot, these assets are great, but I want slightly different, or I want this a little bit more. I want this customization. And so I was like, well, what do I have to do to get that? And I was like, well, let me learn only enough to get it done, because I'm not an artist, but I can hire an artist, and then I can use Substance Painter. That was approachable enough that I could make it work and learn that. And then, you do what you have to. Like I said earlier, the goal is to get your project done. And sometimes you can cut corners, I think. And in the process, you'll learn a lot about what you like, what clicks for you, what you want to stay away from, and should just buy on the asset store or hire out,
Definitely. Sorry, I was trying to get these guys back in here too. I don't know what happened. It just knocked them both out. So I don't know. I sent them the links. Hopefully they can just jump back in. That was weird. Restream broke. Kicked everybody out. Kicked half of them out. Let's see. Matt's messaging me on Skype right now.
Yeah. Well, there's
connecting. Interesting.
There's a question on the chat about Infinity PBR doing more low poly stuff.
Let's pop that one up.
Yeah. I mean, so the story there is I make stuff that I want for my own game. I'm still working on a game. I made the Barbarian, and the Barbarian, I can tell a story later about how they got its name from the asset store, basically. But a long time ago, I wanted to make games, so I started making stuff for my game, and then I'm like, okay, well, it's going well. I'm not losing money in Infinity PBR, and since I want to do it for my own game, it makes perfect sense to keep it going. But we all see low poly as a thing that people love. We see Cincy Studios doing a lot of cool stuff there, and a lot of other publishers on the asset store doing a lot of cool stuff, a lot of games coming out. So I'm like, well, is it easy enough to get my stuff converted to low poly? And it's not cheap, but it's not insurmountable. So we started making some. And so, yes, we're going to do more. I don't think low poly for Infinity PBR will be like the main thing, unless it grows enough where I can hire somebody to do that. But, if people like using it, and certainly enough people have been buying it to keep me converting more of my stuff to low poly, the characters and stuff. So, but I think that's when I approach publishing on the asset store very similar to I think how a lot of people might approach game dev, where you make what you like, because if you're going to spend the next who knows how much time, how much money making something, you better like it, right? Because otherwise you're just going to stop. It's not going to work if you don't like it. So make what you like. There's Jason.
Hey everyone, yeah, sorry, I don't know what happened there.
Yeah.
There we go.
And Jason, you're muted. Jason Wyman.
Oh,
whoops. Of course, I'm muted.
okay.
Looking good. Ah, Matt was here and
So
then
close.
gone again. There we go. Oh, he's back. All
Okay,
right.
that was strange.
Yeah.
Technical
yeah.
difficulties every time.
That's so weird. And I'm like, wait, I'm doing like a speed test and I've got like 500 down. I'm like,
Yeah, I was watching the stream. I'm like still watching it. It's happening, and yet I can't get back in. Yeah.
Oh, that was definitely odd. Hopefully it doesn't happen again. That's the first time that's happened though.
Wait, can
Yeah.
you guys see me right now?
Yeah.
Because it says lost connection to host. Like it's literally giving me a black screen. Like it's like retry.
Oh, you look good.
Yeah.
That's fine.
You guys are all like dim. You guys are all dim. Like it's like broken, but it's.
You can
fine.
always with this, by the way, you just duplicate your tab and open another one, and then it just shows you as the second person there. You'll just hear us twice. And then you can have another tab up there.
Gotcha. Okay.
Try to get it cleared out. Anyway.
That was strange. Sorry about that, guys.
What did we miss? But we were off in the ether.
Speaking of ether.
Oh, nice. I like it.
So yeah, what do you guys think of NFTs in games?
I don't know much about NFTs aside from I've bought and sold at too low of a value some random cryptocurrencies and whatnot, and hoping that it goes up so that I can, make a little bit of money and something. But it's interesting. We were talking earlier about it, and it seems to me like sort of and correct me if I'm completely off base here, but it seems to me like NFTs are a way to put physical scarcity value into what is otherwise freely available because you could just copy it. I mean, Napster of anything, right? And
exactly, artificial scarcity. That's like literally what it is. It's turning digital content into the art industry. It's sort of it's adding conceptual and personal value to things that now are tradable and uniquely identified and whatever. Yeah,
certainly. And there's a bandwagon here, clearly, because of millions of dollars being spent on things that have only intrinsic value from the fact that people are spending millions of dollars, but they don't necessarily have the utility value, right? So if I'm in a virtual world and I buy a shovel, I can dig virtual holes in a virtual world with a virtual shovel and get virtual gold that I can then buy for other things. But eventually I need to somehow, if I'm working in that economic system, I need to be able to buy real food for my real belly.
This is it, right? Like I felt the same way you do. I felt like there's the mental disconnect, but there's proof of this already working in tons of other different areas. For example, there are RuneScape farmers. There's entire places in the world where people, their day job is they will play RuneScape and do the grunt work for you, and then you would pay for the privilege of having them do this. And then that's literally how they pay their bills, because they have people pay to do the grinding work for them. You've got Second Life, where people have financed their lives by like building models and art and things that people can furnish their virtual houses with. And like I know a guy who used to play some Russian MMO thing, and like some of the swords in that game would go for like $2,000 for just like a sword, and people would be you'd play the game with the express hope that you'd get one lucky drop, and that one lucky drop you could sell for like, you're now set for 2 months if you can just play the game long enough to get one item. And so like there is a precedent of people using digital content in a way that can put food on the table, but it's a dangerous house of cards. Like it's one thing that I really enjoy it because I do think there's a major problem that artists don't have a good way to monetize themselves. Like at the moment, art is considered like an offshoot industry. Like you have to buy the art. Well, not like art as in paintings, but art as in for game dev and this kind of stuff. You have to like buy the art to put it in something. Unless you're an actual game dev, people perceive art as having no value in and of itself. And so having a way for artists to like have a cool model be valuable in and of itself is a great idea. Like I really love what it's doing, but I'm just so worried about the fact that there's no, it's not gold backed. You know what I mean? Like there's no weight behind some of these ideas, and so we're entirely at the whims of the companies that are setting this stuff up. So
yeah, it's interesting. It's from what I hear, they speaking of gold, they say, what is it? Bitcoin's the gold and Ethereum's the cash right now. Like that's kind of how people are looking at it. But I guess it gets into like a larger talk, like what makes gold valuable, and things like that. Why is there such this value on those type of things? And it's the scarcity, right? It's the people that make it valuable, and it's interesting to see where this is all going to go. I'm really curious to see, like, is something like Unity going to start adopting this, right? Are we going to start seeing like blockchain like inside of like gaming applications made by developers? Like, is this going to go like even bigger? It seems to be like rapidly evolving because people are looking at the upside of this, and if it takes off, it could be enormous, right? So it's like, where exactly is this headed? Are we headed to like the Oasis, right? Where that's where we're all going to be, right? Right? Like, is it going to be one killer app that rules us all, and we all better have our digital items and currency and stuff in there? Like, I don't know. Could be.
Although, but therein lies the problem. If the metaphor is that we live in the Oasis and we can all have our own things, if we live in a world with artificial scarcity in the form of NFTs, then not everybody can have their, squadron fighters and their ATSTs or whatever, because someone will own that and then you can't have it. And that's sort of, if anything, that's probably not a good thing for that universe to live in.
Well, see, so the argument is not true. Everybody can have it, but somebody has the
you
original.
Own the real one, or the kind of the license for it. Yeah, but then again, I guess it comes down to how that manifests itself. Because if you've got a digital world, surely the value of owning the deed is different than being the only one who can have it. And I imagine if you were to build a digital environment, then the next level of scarcity is to allow only those people to have it, like a custom skin in a game. So maybe that's not what it's doing yet, and it's different for like real world art and that kind of thing. But I imagine if you bring NFTs into games, it won't just be the kind of land deed. It will be whoever has this item can create these things, because that's where the next evolution of the idea is, right?
Yeah. No, totally. It's it. I'm sorry.
No, I was imagining a virtual factory that pumps out virtual goods that you can then use to create a new virtual product, and then pay somebody to build a virtual factory, and you could recreate the whole world in that. But the reality is that all of that value comes down to, I have something that you don't have, that nobody else can have, that you can't have. So as long as it's almost as it treated as a zero-sum game, then you're creating this sense of value. But I don't know, it goes into politics and economics that is probably above my pay grade, but it certainly feels
we're hitting what's called the labor theory of value at this stage.
Yeah.
At which point is value added to a product? Is it the actual product, or is it the work that goes into making it, and then who gets to decide that, and then is it the market forces that decide the value of a product? That's what those things are, right? Because you are literally building an economy in a game, and now once you start tying that to real finances, you get into really squirrely territory.
Is it valuable because it's scarce, or is it valuable because it does something that provides value, that gives somebody entertainment or something?
That's
if there's a gold rush, you don't want to be the guy panning for gold. You want to be the guy selling the pans, like
shovels.
That's shovels. Yeah.
I was trying to wrap my head around that. If you've looked at that Sandbox, like why are all these big investors spending? I mean, it's not cheap. Like, if you want to buy, a little tile within this game, which is like a certain, think of it as like a region, like a 100 by 100 area where your player could go in and do stuff, right? you want to buy that area to put some type of experience in there, it costs like substantial, like 50 grand or more for that little, you know, slice of the game. It's like they're selling off real estate of the game. Like if you're building Warcraft and, you know, all right, let's start selling off Azeroth. What part of it do you want? Right.
But they're all like hardcore Ethereum advocates that are into this stuff, right? They're buying it. These are all guys that have probably made a lot of money on Ethereum and plan to make a lot more money on Ethereum and are willing to put a lot of Ethereum into things that they think might potentially just keep going up in value.
That's the crazy thing. It's like, do they have some knowledge of like a user base for the Sandbox? Like, do they know that this
My guess is that they want to sell it to the second wave of investors. You know, like they'll be the first wave and they'll sell it to the next wave as Ethereum goes up. And then get out.
It's so crazy.
Like, I just think about like, I don't know, all this stuff that are all just like, you know, blockchain entries or database entries, and they could all just change or disappear overnight. Like I keep that League of Legends disc that I've got. I don't know if you can see it. It's up there. It just reminds me of like, I should have just sold my fucking League of Legends account when it was valued at $7,000, right? Like I look it up every now and then, like, how the hell is it worth so much? Because there was like one skin on there that there were only a couple of, and the account number was like 900. Like the value was super high, and it's like, oh, whatever. Maybe one day I'll sell it, right? Maybe one day. And then they re-released all the skins that I had that were special and unique, right? Like all of them got re-released, and the value of the account plummeted down to like basically like what I've spent on skins probably. Like all of these things, like they're just database entries. Like somebody can change, and when it's artificial scarcity like that, like I wonder like what stops them from just changing their mind to do more, right? Like you made $1 million selling them. Like
exactly. I mean, that's Nintendo in a nutshell, right? The amount of times Nintendo produced some product like the Amiibos where they're like, oh no, the most popular character, we only have less of those than all of these other characters you can get. I guess you'd better rush out and buy them, and I guess we might make some more at some future unspecified time. And so like it works because, you know, people want that, you know.
I'm wrong about everything though, so don't take that as advice not to do it, because I'm sure I'll be wrong.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, it's interesting, like, you know, talking about virtual goods and virtual items, like, you know, I think we're betting on, there's like a lot of kind of you're putting your faith into the developer saying, oh, he's only going to make this many, so you must get it, right? They're not going to do it again. But there's no rules that say, oh, well, if that's sold out, then let's just do another batch of them. And then the value, you know what I mean? Like they already got the money. They don't care. So then are they going to just, you know, you're trusting them. But there's, you know, in business, like, you know, is real, like you said, you've already shafted on your League of Legends skins, right? It's like, is that trust valid? I don't know.
I think it's even more than that. Like let's say in a hypothetical world where everyone is good actors, and if they say they're only going to make a limited version, they'll make a limited version. So we've removed that problem off the table. But here's what I think is a bigger problem. So one of the comments said, you're not paying for ownership, you're paying for validation. So like everyone, I own a hat, so I basically have the NFT for this hat. Everyone wears my hat, but at the end of the day, it has my name on it, and you're all having to wear my branded hat. That's fine, but the problem with that mindset is we live in a remix culture. Like Beeple sold his humongous collection of artwork for a lot of money. But what is his artwork? It's pictures of people who are famous doing silly stuff and various, like he's got a lot of remix culture in there. So the question is, if you live in a world where you're applying value to a single instance of an object, people are like taking those things, changing colors, flipping them upside down, adding new things to it, and this is now a new entity. And like meme culture is for what it is like you can't stamp one thing as being super valuable when people can just remix it, and the remixes will probably be more valuable or more interesting, and culture will change and shift. So that's kind of what I have a problem with the philosophy of locking something in as a piece of value, because there's just too many ways people can be creative around the topic, and you're kind of falling into a territory of saying it's like how people can't play Nintendo games on YouTube because they know they'll get copyright strike and they can't do it. So Nintendo are being left out of a lot of meme fun culture because people are like, I don't want to risk that. So if you start NFTing things and drawing division lines between what's valuable and what's remixable and what's sellable and how much value that has, it's, you know what I mean? Like it'll devalue the certainty of a single thing if remix culture is just going to change it anyway.
Yeah, it's super interesting. This is kind of the reason why, like, and don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm on the NFT bandwagon. I'm excited. I'm like, hey, can we can this take off? Is this going to be something new? I don't know. It's kind of the Wild West right now, right? I mean, there's been some validation with some really high end art stuff, but you know, is this really going to take off mainstream? But what I do see is combining the NFT with the physical, right? So having something tangible to go along with it, whereas the NFT is more of the authenticity of the item, right? You know, because that's always like a hard thing, like having in any type of collectible or anything like that, right? Having that certificate of authenticity. Well, I think the NFT is the perfect type of digital component to a physical item, right? And even having something visual or virtual with that NFT that coincides with the physical item, I think makes that I think has a pretty good argument for being what makes a collectible, because there's so many fake collectibles. There's so many different ways, like you said, to kind of remix and do stuff where it's a lot harder to do something like that. And I honestly feel like artwork going forward in galleries and all types of mediums should have a digital authenticity, like an NFT associated with it. So if you buy a painting from a studio, you should also be getting an NFT with it. And I see that being very valuable. But I can see what you're saying, like the whole remix culture and what makes something original. Like there's a whole, it's so new that nobody's really scratched the surface of that yet. And you're seeing it all over the place. Like you go on Rarible, Invincible, or any of these things, they're stamping the same thing over and over again. And they're swapping a different color on it and saying, it's the red version. Get it? You know, 101, right? It's like, does that really constitute, you know, originality, right? Or you know, there's got to be, I think there's going to be something that evolves. But personally, I feel that the evolution is the physical with the digital, just because I feel like people want that tangibility. Like there's something to it, right? When you combine the two, there's some type of value there. It's kind of like,
I admit that I can relate to, just because right behind me, you can't really see it, it's out of frame. I have a giant statue of Raziel from the Soul Reaver series.
Oh my god, it's my favorite game of all time.
I've got this like huge statue back there that's just out of frame, and I've got a little certificate of authenticity because it's one of the like X number of created models of this type. And so that kind of thing is like always like, I'm a big fan of having your authenticity of ownership and stuff for no other reason than it's like personal enjoyment of the fact that like I have a rare thing. And I have the same, like there's a little Dr. Horrible figurine up there that's a rare limited amount too. And just I like these little things that are sort of, they're acknowledgements of my own interests, but it's sort of like I've sequestered a rare, hard to find thing. So I can understand it from that principle.
Yeah. From that kind of outlook, you can easily see value, right? It's a lot harder, I think. You know, people are doing these like custom or modded Pokemon cards that are selling for crazy amounts online, and it's like, is it a fad or is it going to keep going? I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows. It's like I said, it's the Wild West right now. It's kind of crazy to see where this evolves. But I think the bigger picture, when you look at some of these virtual plays that are happening where you're buying real estate and things like that, like Earth 2, that was interesting. Like I was looking at that the other day. Have you guys seen Earth 2?
You sent us the link. I had a look there, but I don't know it very well.
It's like a 1-to-1 copy of our world. So take like Google Maps and just like clone it, right? But now you're selling that real estate to people, right? So people are buying like, you know, high populated areas and areas where foot traffic is going to go on the bet that Earth 2 is going to be a platform for all kinds of virtual experiences in the future, right? So this will be the oasis, right, that everybody logs into. So if you're in a certain location, you get the experience at that spot and things like that. So I think that that's kind of where they're going. There's a lot of different kind of thoughts to where this could be, you know, where it could evolve to. But it's really interesting because you can log in there and like go to your house, right? And be like, well, should I just buy the space around my house? You know, because I don't want, you know, some company coming in and buying something over here. It's weird, right? It's a weird kind of like thought process.
Yeah, you guys seen this, right?
I remember that.
Oh yeah. I remember
the $1 million homepage thing where everybody bought pixels and you could buy a pixel for $1.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just reminds me very much of that.
It's totally that. It's 100% that. But now it's like on a worldwide scale. They're like, great idea. Let's do that for the whole Earth.
Yeah. Just that nobody actually goes to the site and looks at the ads. So I wonder if the value of those ads are going to be about the same after the articles are written. Like after all the news goes out in the articles and the stuff about that. I'm just curious.
It's wild. It's super wild.
I could definitely see it too being useful for like graded cards too. Thinking of like graded Magic cards, Pokemon cards, and stuff to actually track, because it's actually in a case. You could have some digital component even on there that's tracking with the NFT. Keep track of the ownership and make sure that it's legit too. Because I don't know. Anyway.
That's the other thing too that I'm conflicted with as just a general culture thing, because I'm a big fan of online stores and things. Like I don't buy Switch games anymore tangibly for the most part, because I just don't want to have a big stack of stuff that gets lost over the years. And same with most things, I'll buy digital games and digital copies. With the rare exception of one or two things I like, I'll buy the super special edition with the fancy model or whatever it is that I enjoy. So I kind of like that culture's going in this digital way, because it's so much easier when everything's hyper connected. And like the fact that I no longer have a hard drive somewhere with a million songs that are all badly named with ridiculous titles and stuff is great, because I can just go to my Google Music thing and just go play whatever song comes to mind, and it's great. But again, that's also disconnecting from all of the tangible stuff. And I found the older I got, the more I had nostalgia for my old stuff. And now I've now rebought almost all of the damn games that I chose as a kid not to keep. And so it's kind of an interesting thing that I do think that there will be a point where you're 100% right that we need to tie something tangible to this stuff, not just to sort of give it some sort of additional worth, but also just because people like having stuff. People like the feeling of it, being able to say, look at this thing I have. Saying, well, did you know I actually own that? It's like, okay, like that doesn't mean anything if you're pointing at a screen and just arbitrarily saying that you have some digital key that proves something. There's a difference if you can hold up the thing in your hand and sort of be proud of it,
Totally. Or having like a QR code on the bottom of it or something where they boom, oh wow, you actually own this. You're the original. You're the original. Like to me that seems very, very valuable. But then that's just me, right? And I think this is just you and me talking as two people with a certain perspective. But then you have millions of other people who are like, nah, it's way cooler the other way. And it's like, well,
I personally, I'm not affected by owning the original myself. So I hear you guys talking, I'm thinking, well, that doesn't do it for me. Like I like having things, certainly, right? There's a printer behind me, but I like that I can print out board game prototype things on this printer because the ink is cheap. And that's what I like about it. I tell everyone, get this printer. It's the best one because the ink is cheap on Amazon. Right. But
yeah, I struggle the same too. Like if I can get a knockoff version of something and it's the same quality, like I'm gonna take the cheap knockoff any day. Yeah. But so there were a couple more questions I wanted to hit in chat.
I've changed on that though. I do think that I used to be very much the same way, but there's just been certain things that have cropped up. Like for example, I'm quite happy to say I'm one of the few people who managed to luckily grab a analog pocket purchase before they ran out, and they ran out in like 3 minutes. So that's like the new Game Boy, basically the fancy new whatever. And like loads of people are like, there's so many people online just like angry that they didn't get in on that one thing. And I'd like to pretend that I'm a more evolved human being, that I don't take pride in the fact that I'm one of the few people who has it. But, I do.
This is a limited edition hoodie that they only did like 1,000 of. And I bought it on the phone while waiting in a courthouse. I was sitting there refreshing the page. So I'm with you there too. But if I could have bought the same thing for a tenth the price.
True, it won't stop me. I'll admit that. Like I like stuff I like, and I don't care if it's a limited run. It's just it's nice sometimes if it's a limited run, but it's not going to be the defining factor for me.
I'm so jealous. I'm so jealous that you got one of those analog pockets. By the way, those things are gorgeous.
Yeah.
Is it? Did you get it?
No. They've pushed it back by like another 6 months, and they've even done a second run as well. So they've now done 2 separate runs of orders for it. But like it's still going to take forever. So
yeah, but they probably just like did some nice 3D models of it, and we're like, this is what it's going to look like. Oh crap! Now we got to build it. Is it Game Boy Advance, original Game Boy, and
The whole
like,
shebang, yeah, which is nice.
all through DS too, or just the
No, not DS. Up until the originals. But I do have. It does color original Game Boy Advance, and then it's got adapters for things like the Atari Lynx and stuff. It's like crazy. You can add other weird additional consoles and things. So,
Oh, that's
I'm
awesome.
looking forward to that.
Oh man, I'm gonna have to pony up on eBay for that.
Hey, and if there's any consolation, I've been trying to get a PS5 for like 6 months, so I can't find one of those. So,
you know, I tried over what was it, over Christmas or whatever, and a friend of mine, he got 2 on Target, like was able to get 2, and I still have not got one. So yeah,
I just refuse to pay scalper prices because I just know.
Oh yeah.
Like I don't, especially when there's no games yet. Like if Ratchet and Clank was out, I would probably end up having one night where I just frustratedly go screw it and buy it. But the fact that like even if I have it, there's Spider-Man, and I could probably just get that for PS4 or whatever. So I'm not there's nothing yet that hooks me. But if I still don't have one by the time Ratchet and Clank comes out, I'm just gonna go online and buy one. I know I will. So
that does look amazing. That Ratchet and Clank, the like the multiverse thing where they go through the dimensional.
And like not even just visually, like from a technical standpoint, my brain is just spinning the whole time as a programmer going, there's so much magic happening here with like the streaming of the levels and how it's rendering. Like I can't help but be impressed by everything about it.
That looks incredible. It really does. It really does. Yeah, I can imagine that's like a programmatical almost nightmare thinking about like all the different, ways they could have accomplished that. But yeah,
because like from the videos, apparently you just jump through into a different level, and it's like it's not just happening once. Like it's one thing to sort of say, oh, I'll just stream the second level and jump into one to the other. It's like apparently you can just bounce around in places. So it's like how many of these instance things are they loading? And they've got like the game is swarming with enemies. So that means there must be a swarm of enemies on an island and another swarm of enemies on an island, and you're just jumping between them, and then they hot swap the islands. It's like there's just so much going on.
Yeah. It's awesome. I think
and it looks fun. That's the other thing too. It does actually look like a fun game on top of all of
that. Totally.
Yeah, there were a couple questions I guess I wanted to just jump onto real quick and catch up on. But before I did that, I wanted to make sure that everybody hit the thumbs up button and shared the video because the like count is way too low. And yeah, I figured everybody just go post it on Facebook or wherever else they watch videos and share stuff. And then we'll just jump on. There was this and like at least two other questions I wanted to kind of briefly talk about. And the first one was just on multiplayer code and whether they should make their own stuff or use a third-party asset for their game. And I read through a little bit further, and it looks like they're trying to. The end goal is make a game with 1,000 players online at the same time. But it doesn't sound like they're at that end goal right now. It's just kind of starting it out. So I thought this was at least I thought Jason might have some feedback on it. I personally would. I think that if you're going to get to that scale, you're probably going to need to write custom stuff, but I wouldn't necessarily start there because until you really understand why you need the custom stuff, it's going to be hard to do it right. I'm curious.
I always go with the don't solve problems you don't have solution. Like I work at companies where they're trying to make an app and they spend months building this super high-end architectured back-end system, and you're like, dude, you don't have 10 users yet. Like these are architected systems designed to scale. Make the thing, scale it as it goes. And when it comes to questions like this, like the metaphor I always use is it's like you want to have a salad. So you say, hey, I'm going to go have a salad. So you go outside and you start mixing cement. You're like, what are you doing? Well, I need to make the cement, to make the bricks, to make the shed, to make the place to store the vegetables so I can plant the vegetables so I can make... Like, no, you don't. You're not... Are you making a salad or are you making a farm? If you're making a salad, make the salad and let someone else deal with all of the other stuff that gets you there. Like, it's there's no reason for you to start building an entire multiplayer architected engine when what you're actually trying to do is make a game that might be fun. So make that first, and then if it turns out that it is fun, maybe revisit the question and try to see if you want to scale up the back end with some third-party solution, or build it yourself if it doesn't support it.
That's the argument for prototyping right there.
Yeah, I think that's... I couldn't have said it any better. That was perfect. Let's see, what were the other questions that I was going to check out? Oh, yes, that was one of the ones I was going to find. Let me see if I can find that in here. Probably.
That was a question. It was asked a while ago. I find it really hard to stay motivated on coding a project that I have no art for. Is that normal for programmers? And does that mean I'm maybe more suited to game art? I don't know what normal is. Normal probably doesn't exist. But I would say I do not like gray boxing or white boxing, whatever you want to call it, projects. I much prefer to have some pretty art if I'm going to prototype something. And I think there's some fringe benefits there. If you are working on something and you're showing people and it's all gray boxes, they might be like, what is this? But if you show them and there's buildings and forests and characters, even if they're not what you really want in the game, people are going to be like, oh, it's a game. Cool. Let me try it out. Because they need, non-devs need that. Yeah, they need that grounding in what they expect. Otherwise, it's, I mean, even I prototype 2D tabletop game, not 2D, but tabletop games, and my partner won't play them with me because unless they're like printed cards, she won't play anything that I've handwritten because it doesn't click. You need something. That's just me. So
I'm kind of with you. Like, I have a hard time if it's super gray boxed and ugly, staying attached to it too. And usually what I'll do is once I've got the loop down of like it feels okay with whatever placeholder thing I have in there, the basic gameplay, then I will start making it pretty. Not perfect pretty, because I'm not good at that, but I will start replacing the art, putting in particles, making it feel a little bit more like a game, because I feel like it helps me stay motivated. And again, I don't expect these to be like the final end result versions of the art most of the time. I just think they're like my stepping stone to better visually represent what it is I want to show. Because I think if I show somebody a bunch of boxes and things flying around versus I show them my like dude that actually looks like a guy that's shooting a rifle that looks like a rifle and there's explosions, it's a lot easier for people to understand, or whatever the type of game is. Like if I use something similar, and when I give it to an artist or talk to an artist or talk to anybody, they can understand it better. And like, yeah, it just keeps me way more motivated because I can see things. And when I get bored or have a hard time with something, if I get stuck on something, I can just take a few minutes and do some brain dead, like fancify prettying stuff up, right? Spend a little bit of time just like swapping out art and making things look a little bit prettier, where I'm not thinking about code. It gives me like the time off of that mental, like, why is this not working? Why did everything break apart?
I think that's the most important part. So I would say I agree with you. I also like to have the visual stuff, and I think the reason why is because the more experience you have at something you're doing, the more you can visualize the end result without needing all of the plumbing. So like when I'm coding, I can write a system and not need to ever like test it in the editor. Like if I'm doing a UI, I can just write the code and just make it work. And then as long as I run my unit tests, I know it'll eventually connect, it'll look pretty and whatever. But the thing is, that's because I have the experience to see that from my own thing. But with art, I don't have that. I'm not very good at visualizing the end result. And so the same goes for artists. Artists who can like, they know what the vision will look like. It's good for them, but for everybody else, they have no concept. And this is something you learn in even just like, if we step out of games for a second and just talk software, if you're talking to a client and they want a piece of software, like they cannot visualize this at all. You'll need to do some mock-ups and some screens and to sort of give them the helping hand of like what the kind of architecture will look like and how it works. And so I think it is very important to give people that if you're showing it to them. But what's more important, I think, is what Jason was saying, which is you'll work on your project in like blocky art, prove it, do the prototyping, whatever, but you'll eventually hit a point where it sucks, where you're just like bogged down, it's not working, you'll be annoyed, and you need an easy win. And an easy win is like change the skybox, add some post-processing, do something fancy. And that's such a like mental relief to go from why am I wasting my time to, oh my God, it looks a little bit better, I'm re-energized to do it. So I would say yes, do the visuals, but treat it like free candy that you're putting on top of your project. Don't go in, build the whole thing fancy, do the prototyping, and then whenever you hit that lull of that sort of, this isn't going the way I want to, give yourself a little bit of a visual boost, and that'll sort of keep you motivated along the path. So yeah, that's the order I process. I start with white boxes, then when I get a bit fed up, I add some textures, and then when I get a bit fed up, I add some fancy lighting, and then when I get fed up, I add some, I start baking the lighting, and I go down the pipeline that way.
Yeah, I kind of the same way in some of the games that I make, where I always like to, I mean, from an artist standpoint, I always start like building out something that looks like epic, right? Let's say I'm going into a castle. I'm going to build the front of that castle to look like super killer. But then once I'm inside, I'll probably just have like 2 or 3 textures and just start like kind of like, like gray boxing everything out, but lighting it really good and maybe putting some particle effects in there, the occasional prop. But yeah, I feel like you need that. There gets a point, unless you're like really deep into the dev, like you're like level 5, and you're like, okay, I've been working on this for so long. I'm just gonna white box it and hope it plays well and whatever. But even then,
if you're like me, even just white boxes, ambient occlusion can make white boxes look gorgeous. All you need is that little corner of shadows, and even the white boxes can look amazing.
Totally. Yeah, you got to get something in there, yeah, or else it just starts to feel stale. What's crazy to me is I saw this behind the scenes video of what was the latest Star Wars game that they did, that really cool Jedi one, the Jedi Fallen Jedi or something like that. I forget the last one. What was that?
Fallen Order? Is it Fallen Order?
Was it Fallen Order? I forget the name of it, but the last one they came out with, they had a behind the scenes video showing like them developing, and that thing was like straight up just gray boxed. Like I'm like looking at it going, man, no visuals, nothing. Like it was super basic, but then they showed like the final version over it, and I'm like, man, they really just didn't put anything in. I mean, they're just getting it working, and then they throw it to the devs. And
I've seen tons of those. I've seen Drake's Fortune done the same way. I've seen Darksiders done the same way. I've seen Overwatch done like there's tons of these videos of games where it's like it's just some rectangles of like various heights, and it's really cool to see how the mechanics all work, and then you just watch it just get prettier and prettier with each new layer of art.
Yeah, you almost wonder, are they doing that for like is there a purpose for that too? Is it more of like a behind the scenes kind of thing? Because they really could throw stuff in there, right? You could get things working. I would say that who was the Turtle Rock Studios? They did some stuff with Evolve that actually at least had some low level visuals in there when they were, throwing out their initial behind the scenes videos and stuff. But yeah, I just can't work in just gray box. Like this is crazy.
Well, I know Overwatch in particular, specifically because of balancing stuff too. Like the idea is that you need to make sure that the position is right for the right sized boxes for sight lines, and to make sure that the levels are fair. So putting in the effort of doing art that might work, but then needs to be like a few inches taller or needs to be more wider to fit certain things can be a bit of a tedious thing. So getting the blocking right first for a level is very important in like a competitive style game.
That makes sense. Yeah. Got another question. Is it a bad thing to jump between things to learn? Spend a decade jumping between art, animation, coding, shaders. Is there a company position for someone who likes to jump between coding and art? I would say like anytime you're an artist at any studio, if you have some coding knowledge with that, that's actually really valuable. Like I think they appreciate that because it can take some of the responsibilities off their programmers if needed. If you're doing things like writing a custom shader or doing some technical art things, or whatever that be, or writing some type of animation system, if you're able to take the load off of other people and accomplish those and do it well, like that makes you more valuable, I think, not only as an artist, but just as like kind of somebody they can rely on to do other things. So it's not a bad thing to jump between them. I would say, if you're always going to be like killer at one thing, right? And then everything else can kind of accent that. So depending on how well you are at those other things, it's either going to enhance what you do, or, you're going to find something else you're better at. But I'd say that it's not a bad thing at all. I mean, I still am learning coding, and I'm like, what are we, like 20 years in on this stuff almost, it's like, you never stop learning, right? I'm always good at one thing, but then I have other things that kind of accent that. So I guess the answer is no, it's not a bad thing.
And I've met some really good producers who were good at everything like that. If you also like management, but it's a good, because you have a good understanding of all of the disciplines, can make for a really great producer. If you like the management side of stuff, I found that experience helps a lot.
Totally.
I don't know if anybody else had anything else on that.
Well,
I
that's just
think
like
it's
how I
great.
made my career. Like I am a jack of all trades and not particularly great at any one thing. That's what's gotten me most of my work.
I think it's helpful in many things to understand what the other people on your team are doing, even if it's not your focus, just to understand what they're doing enough to know that when they say whatever it is that they're going to say, excuse me, that you understand what they mean rather than having to be like, wait, they just said this is going to take too long, but why is that going to take so long? It looks so easy, because you're like, oh yeah, because they have to do all these other things. And, so I think it's helpful just in general, not just game dev, but to know a little bit about what everyone else that you're surrounded with is doing.
Totally.
There's a great XKCD comic. I wish I could find it, but it's basically it's the classic idea of a programmer saying, someone says, hey, can you make me an app? It says, okay. That I look at it and it shows me all of the bird sanctuaries in the area. It says, cool, give me 3 people and 2 weeks. It says, okay. And then when I point my phone at one of the birds, it tells me what bird it is. It says, okay, give me 20 people and 2 years. And it's like, it's so subtle to know the differences between like what you're asking for. Like if you're not in whatever field it is, you may not know the complexities of what that difference is, right? And so asking someone, oh, can you make a model that does X? Okay, can you make a model that does Y? It's like you may have just asked the difference between 1 week and 1 month, depending on whether it's a character that needs to be rigged correctly versus like a lamppost or whatever, right? So it is certainly valuable to know the complexities of the things you're asking other people to do.
Yeah.
And especially so as a producer. Like I was saying, like that's why like knowing those things and understanding that, like the complexity of stuff, helps a whole lot for like when you want to make a change and knowing what things are reasonable to request and a good idea, and what things are gonna like people will say yes to, but it'll be a terrible idea because it's gonna have this cost they're just not gonna mention and bring up. Like you said, like about it
also helps
taking
with
way
hiring as
longer.
well. If you're
What's that?
hiring people, and it also helps with hiring. So if you're trying to find a new team member and you're either in a position where you don't know what the hell you're actually asking for and you're hoping that they're representing their skills correctly, or if you know enough to know the buzzwords and just see if they're giving you the words that you know from your little research on it, is usually enough to kind of find out if they know what they're talking about.
I just found the link. Link it in there. That's it. There was another question about gray boxing. We talked a little bit about it, just asking if it's necessary or an extra step. And personally, like, I think most of the time it's a time saver, not a waste of time, because it avoids me putting in a bunch of stuff that I'm going to change and delete and redo over and over. I've seen people like try to do the final version of things right away, and they just never finish. They just keep replacing it and never end up finishing. But I'm curious, do you guys have the same experience? Like, how do you feel about gray boxing things? And like, is there a scale at which you'll just completely skip gray boxing it out or prototyping it all? Or
I will avoid gray boxing when possible, simply because it takes me longer, because I will spend too much time trying to build a gray box. Like if I want a sword, I will spend time trying to make a sword out of boxes, and it'll take way longer than just importing a sword. But similarly, the enjoyment is less for me. But I think that's where I find a lot of value in some of the things like the Viking Village from Unity, where you can just download it. And so if I'm trying to work on a character controller, if I'm trying to see if some magic spell system works where I can send projectiles out, it's so easy to download that, or any of the paid assets that have really good demos. It's download that, import it, and then be like, okay, this is not my world, but this is pretty similar to what I would want it to be. So now let me build my system on this. So it's not gray boxing, but it's just as fast for me, at least, because I don't have to. It's just the demo scene. I don't have to fiddle with it. That's what I like about that.
It is the same, because I'm a terrible artist and a terrible builder personally. So if I can demo and prototype and build with an asset that's got a demo scene in it, I'll jump on that. I really hate assets that don't have a demo scene too, especially when they have like a beautiful screenshot of this area. I download it and it's like all the assets, and I got to go try to build it myself. Like I can't do
it's
that.
just like a scene full of stacks of stuff. It's like I have no creativity. Don't do this to me. I don't know what to do with this. I'm a bit cautious on this one too, because I saw a great conversation between video editors, and they were talking about the job of being an editor on a big budget film. And they said that one bit of advice is if you're an editor for a director, if you're giving them cuts of the film, sometimes they'll tell you to put in sample music. So there's meant to be this big dramatic orchestral score here, just grab something and put it in. But one bit of advice is don't do that, because what you're doing is if you put that piece of music in, you are sort of conditioning the director to hear that music with that scene, and you've effectively colored any advice or any decisions you're going to make, because then as soon as the real music comes in, it'll feel wrong because there's an expectation of like, that's not the music that we've been working and thinking with. So as a general rule, depending on what, like if you're a solo project, you can do what you like, it's your thing, but it's worth noting that if you do put in kind of prototypey stuff, you'll find yourself mentally locking in whatever it is that's there to the point where you might have trouble later. So I try to be cautious to walk that line carefully. Trees or whatever, fine. I'll put in trees off some asset because that's like they're trees. But if you start getting into like designing doors and various different things and you're using specific asset ones, you might find a disconnect between what you're actually trying to do versus where the vision is. And so I find it depends on what you're doing. Like there's a difference between whiteboxing a level layout versus whiteboxing a sword, right? That's like a sword's a sword and we'll do a better sword that's our sword later. But if it's a level design where it's like a cinematic, you enter the area and it's got a big landscape or whatever, you might end up, whatever decision you make in the prototyping phase, you might end up ruining future decision making because of whatever you've put in at the start. So I would say whiteboxing is very specific. Do it with the levels a lot, but maybe not so much with things that you know can be swapped out. Like the main character for your game is something that you can kind of you have to be careful with. Like if you're setting yourself up to expect a certain silhouette or something, you might end up, you know, not liking it when you switch to the real art.
That's good advice.
I think in terms of gray boxing, I think I kind of mentioned this before, but I always really just start by throwing in the assets. Really, gray boxing for me kind of starts with the floor, right? So depending on whatever experience I'm developing, I'm really only using gray boxing to make the kind of the floor of the environment, whatever I'm doing, wherever the character is going to be traversing, if they're going up to a secondary level or if they're going upstairs, any of those kind of main elements that you traverse on is essentially what I use gray boxing for. And then I'll just start adding in my own, you know, assets or even asset store assets to kind of pretty that up. And even so, when I'm doing that, I'm using a repeatable texture most of the time. That's probably somewhere close to what I want to have in my game. So if it's like a dirt road with some pebbles on it, I'm going to find or create that texture that's repeating on that Pro Builder piece, let's say, that I'm gray boxing with, to kind of build those environment pieces out. When you get to a castle, I'm using like a stone texture, but I'm still kind of, using gray box to kind of build it all out. So, you know, I guess that's kind of how I do it. And then I start editing it from there. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's very similar.
It's also probably worth mentioning too that this is vastly different depending on the scale of a company. If you're working at like a big company, you're going to have somebody who is a concept artist, and they're going to be doing the concept art, and then that concept art is going to be used to inform the modeling, and then the modeling, and it'll all be this pipeline such that it's impractical to have entire pauses in a pipeline while somebody waits for the right thing to happen at the right time. So often the level designers will be level designing based off of a known grid of 2 block size things, 1 block size things, knee-high walls, whatever the rough sightline blocks need to be for, you know, rendering later elements of the map. And so you're sort of working almost in parallel with each other, and then getting the assets you need from people as they come. And so new piece of concept art, new model dropped in when it's ready. So a lot of the like we talked about big budget games that are using whiteboxing, but that's a lot more from necessity rather than from the philosophical debate we're having now. So there tends to be a big difference between should you whitebox or should a big company do it? And if it's for you, I think it entirely comes down to what you're making. If you're making a walking narrative adventure, then the visuals are going to be a really important part of that process. Like that's literally like a game like Firewatch. The visuals are like most of the game. So you kind of need to know that you have that right, that feeling for the player. But in contrast, if you're playing like a 2D platformer game, it's probably more important that you have the heights of blocks correct and the way the mechanics move. And so you could make that game almost entirely with cubes just to prove that it's fun. And getting the tight game loop is probably more important than the visuals that can then be styled later depending on what you settle on. So
they can be done in parallel at least, right? Like the designers can be building out the fun stuff while the artists are figuring out the cool art, and then slapping the art on top of it too, because they've got some design elements in there to work with.
Yeah.
I don't know if there are, let's see what else we got here for questions.
Somebody asked when to put music into a game, and I think that's an interesting topic. I think it's very similar to what Jason's story you were saying about the once you add it, you might not like it later. But my general sense is to add audio early, if for no other reason, to build the systems into your game, so you know, okay, I do need audio here. But then also, it really helps with mood and figuring out what is the mood you want your players to be feeling at any given time. So even if you're, again, asset store audio, right? Even if you're going with that, I think it's important to start earlier. But I think a lot of people probably push it off until the very, very, very end.
The very end, yeah.
Yeah, I get it in there quick. People don't notice that it's missing until you point it out, right? Like you put it in and people will suddenly, I think, feel it a lot more, especially depending on the type of game. If you can get good music that kind of fits with the atmosphere of the game, if it's like fun and uplifting or scary or whatever, something that kind of matches with it, it just kind of amplifies what's actually going on with the game. So there's definitely good to do, and it's relatively easy to do if you do it from the beginning. You just pay a little bit of attention.
I'm really biased on this topic. So, because I think my favorite thing in games is leitmotifs for characters. And once you have thematic, because music that's done correctly is storytelling. Like, it's not just sound that covers things. Like, people, if you hear the Darth Vader theme, like, that's informing your perception of the story. And one of the best examples of this is Undertale. People talk about that game to this day as like a big famous thing, because that game really understood the impact of sound design on their game. And like, I'm a big fan of that, and for no other reason to prove it than I have more headphones here than I can possibly count. Various pairs. I like my music. I take my music very seriously. And so, as far as I'm concerned, I think sound design is one of the most important things in a game, and it's often overlooked because people don't really ask themselves what the point of it is. But like, it's world building. Like, it's entirely down to it's an entire sense that will inform the design of your game. And a lot of people leave it to the end thinking you can just put anything on there. But like, it is a storytelling tool. And if you understand the effect of cutting noise out, or suddenly there being wind, or it's the same as using light to direct. Like, you can say your game is just light to light up a scene, but good games will use light as a tool. Like, it'll highlight certain things, it'll focus certain areas, they'll use light to draw your eye, to cause leading lines. And music, just like light, is a tool that can help tell your story, not just like mechanically solve something. So I would say really look into it, and like look into how some games just really, like Celeste is another one, Darkest Dungeon. There's loads of games where the sound design fundamentally makes the game better, and it's So I'm biased on this topic. It's very interesting to me.
Yeah, I just say make sure that you put an option in there to turn the music down though.
And don't start it at 100%. For the love of God, don't default your volume at 100. The amount of games where you open it and it just drives me insane.
Blasting music and you can't hear anything else. Yeah, it drives me insane. I always just end up muting the music. I'm like, oh, that was too loud.
Like one of my most remembered games of my life is, I don't even know, I won't bother reaching for it. I'll probably take forever to find it. Banjo-Kazooie. And the reason why is Grant Kirkhoff did so much work with the way the sound works in that game. So if you don't know, if you're running along into a level, you enter from one area to the other, the music shifts from the theme for one area to another, but then the theme changes depending on where in the level you are. So it's the same music, but other instruments gets added or removed. And then if you dive underwater, it plays the same music, but like an underwater version of the song. And another example of this is Nier Automata. If you play that and the music is playing and you hack something, it goes into like a hacking minigame. It's the exact same song that continues from the same point, but it plays it in like an 8-bit version. And then when you go back, it continues. So the music shifts, but it like maintains where it is. It's so cool. Like this stuff really, like you don't realize it until you're playing, if you actually stop paying attention. But like all of this stuff is really making the game better.
That's cool. That's super cool. Yeah, Banjo had some of the best songs. Like, I mean, that the soundtrack of that game was still amazing. Yeah, it's one of those games too. You can still go back in today and still have fun with it. You know, show my kids.
I literally have an N64 here with Banjo Tooie in it because I never actually played that as a kid. So I'm actually playing through it at the moment.
Nice. Did you get to Yuka at all? Any of those? The new stuff they did?
No. Oh, ukulele. Yeah, I backed that on Kickstarter, and honestly, I hated it. I really tried, but because of the physics system they used, it's a lot floatier. Everything just like you'd slide on surfaces, and they use the standard like physics stuff. And I was like, the reason I liked the older physics systems is because they would apply velocity values directly. So you had a lot of like. It was kind of more repeatable for the actions, and so I played ukulele. And it's like I was missing jumps where I understood the problem. So this is like a whole different conversation. But when it comes to puzzle solving, there's two things. There's the understanding how to solve it, and there's the mastery of doing it. And once you understand how to solve a problem, like you look at it and go, oh, I have to jump on that, do this thing, whatever. That's the fun part. And then the second part is the mastery of doing it. And if you've already solved it and you just have to keep repeating it over and over again because the mechanics are stopping you, it's so disheartening and it ruins whatever the puzzle was. So if the mechanics get in the way of the puzzle, then, and that's what it was for me. It was like, I understood the game, I understood the buttons, I understood the mechanics, but actively doing it led to like sliding off corners of rocks. And I just went, I don't have the mental processing for this. I'm done.
I felt the same way, and I did the same thing too. I backed it, and I was really hoping for another Banjo Kazooie, right? I mean, I think we all were. We're like, okay, that's what it's going to be, but it just didn't quite get there. Although I will say though, I thought that their follow-up game they did, that on rails kind of thing they did, that was like
I've heard that's great. I haven't played it, but I've
that
heard
was
like,
pretty good. Like I was like, okay, that to me was much better. But there was so many, and it's funny, there was so many Unity things in ukulele that I caught, while I was playing it, going, oh, I've seen that before. Like, so many different player controllers and stuff. So yeah, it was kind of a letdown, but hopefully, it seems like they might be working on the sequel to it. So we'll see. But yeah, could have been better. But you're right. It was the physics controller. It was like floaty. It wasn't like spot on. It needed a little bit more work. But yeah,
this is like, these are the things that people. So here, it's just again, I know I'm going on a tangent here, so I apologize for taking up so much airtime. But I love these topics. 2D versus 3D. People were talking about 2D games, are they dead? Whatever. 2D games are so much more complicated than you think they are, because you could take an average 2D game and go, right, let's add velocity, move forward, move back, jump button, whatever. But the thing is, there's so many micro optimizations you can do. Like if you try to jump into a wall with the standard physics controller, you'll hit the wall and you'll stick. You'll probably notice that from bad platformers. You'll like stick into a wall and it's like, what's happening? Because they didn't use like a proper physics material to slide off of those things, or the box collider is not right. And there's tons of micro optimizations like Coyote Time. That's one we talked about before, where games that are really trying to make it feel good for a player means if you run off an edge and you take too long to press the jump button, it'll still let you jump. It's actually tracking the fact that you tried to press it after you've already left the ground, because like if you miss the jump by 2 frames, that feels terrible, right? Like the goal is to make a game that feels good, not a game that's like accurate. Well, you screwed up, so tough, right? And there's so many of these things, like the jump. People think about Mario's jump, and if you just do a standard physics movement and then apply 2, you'll get a parabola like this. You'll get a perfectly linear go up, go down. But that's not what Mario does. If you hold A, he jumps higher the more A is held. If you press A, he does a little pop. And so the amount of jump you get is relative to how much force you're applying. And that's that. You don't get that for free. You have to actually like plan that arc. And then when you drop, his gravity doubles. So his actual arc is a lot floatier and then a sheer drop. And so like, if you're saying is 2D dead or is 2D not as complicated as 3D or whatever, like you can go into the minutia of making a good character controller, and that's one of the most important things in a game. There's reasons why there's some games you'll remember as being really satisfying to play and other ones you won't, because they took the time to like, what is the moment to moment experience like? What are all of these micro, am I like clipping terrain or hitting my head on stuff, or if my button's not registering on time? Like these things are really important to the difference between a good game and a bad game. And so I wouldn't discount it. Like, you can make a small game and then make it really, really good by learning all of these little things. You don't have to just jump into something big and complicated, you know?
Totally.
You brought up fun things and what makes a game fun. And Jason, you were talking about how it becomes less fun when you figure it out, but now you just have to do these kind of monotonous things. And there's a concept in tabletop game design, which I think probably fits in video games perfectly well, that you need to end the game before the player actually gets everything they want. Because once you get everything you want, games get really boring really fast. So like there's a lot of a lot of tabletop games. You're collecting cards, you're building up your whatever it is, and then the game's over and you're like, oh, I was so close to having everything. But if you actually kept playing a few more turns, once somebody gets everything, it's like, okay, now what? And I think for video games, it's very similar. You want to continually having these challenges that you need to overcome, that you need to learn, figure something out. But once you get to the point where you figure it all out, it's kind of not as fun anymore. What do you think?
I think a lot of those like games where, we were talking about Dead Cells, right? That's kind of like that kind of experience where you constantly want to go back and evolve each time you play it. And the whole gameplay experience is based on that, right? It's kind of collecting everything. But even when you get everything, then you still can go back and keep going. You know what I mean? They don't let it just end at that point. So I think that there's something really interesting to that. I think, Jason, you were going to say something.
Oh yeah, no, I was just gonna say that's like a classic thing for anything. Is when people say always leave them wanting more, right? And it comes down to that idea that players have a bad habit of they will optimize out the fun. If you give people a way to not have fun in the game, but to do it something optimally, they will. And so if there's like a direct path of upgrades that'll always get you the best build, people will do that. If there's a gun that's more powerful than every other gun in the game, they'll hate themselves if they're not using the obvious correct answer. And so your best bet is to try to find a way to force people to engage with the systems. So some of the smartest game designs are things where you have a level of building as you go. So for example, I played a game called Gunfire Reborn recently, and they've got a tree of your upgrade tree. But the way it works is every time you enter a room and you complete it, at the end of the room, you get one of 3 random upgrades for your tree. You don't get to pre-plan your build. You have to run with the flow of, am I getting stuff that makes my bullets stronger? So should I aim for more bullets? Or am I getting stuff that's elemental? So should I lean in the elemental direction? And so it forces you to engage in a way that's a lot more fun. And so 100%, and this isn't even just games, right? This is a film principle as well. If you ever wondered why some films feel like they're stilted and slow, and you figured it out in 10 minutes and you're just sitting here waiting for the characters on screen to figure out the same as you, that's because of a principle of you as the audience have gotten ahead of the directing, because the directing has had people give you this expositional dump of yes, I'm going to go do this thing and go to this place and have this whatever. And now all you're doing is you're going to see it on screen happen. And that's not fun because you've already engaged with the problem. And that's why what good directing does is it keeps you not understanding what's going on. And so there's a really great scene in the movie Inside. Was it not Inside? No, Get Out. In the movie Get Out, the one where he's sitting in the chair and he's being hypnotized. So a little editing trick for that is you hear this sound of ringing, but you don't know what it is. And over the course of the shot, they eventually cut to the cup where she's spinning a spoon, but you don't see the cup until after you've already heard it. And so you're hearing the sound and it's telling you that there's something going on. And then when it cuts to the shot of that, you're like, oh, that's what that noise is. And so this is keeping you as an audience behind the director. You're chasing behind with new information, and so you never get time to be bored. You never get time to have I figured out everything that's happening on scene, so there's nothing for me to do. And so exactly the same principle. You always want to make sure that you are a little bit ahead of your audience, so they always have something to chase for.
Totally. That's so funny. That's such a great scene, that movie. It brought back memories of that. Man, that movie was awesome. But yeah, that when you hear that sound, I totally remember that scene. That's crazy.
And it's so memorable. And also he's such a great actor. I remember that guy from he was in the Black Mirror episode, the Million Demerits.
Yeah.
I remember seeing that and I thought, this guy's going to go far. And then within a year, he's in one of the biggest movies of all time. It's
yeah,
that's awesome.
That's awesome.
So there were a couple questions about your YouTube channel, Jason, that you still haven't made. What's going on there? Jason? Oh, what happened to the audio?
Oh, sorry. I think I dropped out there for a second.
Okay, yeah, your audio got quiet and Matt disappeared. I was like, went silent.
Back in.
Stream's having trouble. Yeah.
Yeah. Any update on that?
Honestly, have no idea why it's reconnecting. It just decides it likes to just disconnect and reconnect. No idea. So then I keep clicking the join button. So hopefully we're good. We'll see.
Yeah. Any plans with the YouTube channel soon or?
Yeah. I have scripts for videos written. I've got stuff planned. But for those who know, I do contract. Like I do still work, and so I try to find time to do this stuff. And I was making good progress for a while, but then I got sidetracked with a particularly big project. So unfortunately, it is entirely it is at the moment secondary. So it's not my primary objective. So I'm still working towards it, but I mean, I have to wait until I have various time to do it. So I'm sorry. I know I keep saying I'll make a YouTube channel. I just haven't.
It'll happen soon. At very least, they can keep getting you to come on here every Sunday.
How long? Hey, Jason, how long have I been saying I'm going to make a YouTube channel?
I was just going to say, how about the two of you on the bottom there?
It's been quite some
channels
time.
and things you want to share with people.
I have a YouTube channel, and it's cool. You can search for it, Infinity PBR. It's somewhere. InfinityPBR.com is the website. It links to that. And I've been trying to do more Twitch is the thing that I've been, I'm not the biggest streamer, but I understand the value, and not only for the community, but also for myself to kind of, kick myself in the pants and say, okay, sit down for 2 hours and do this, figure it out. Right. And so I've been trying to do more of that too. So, but we'll see how that, and then I'll throw those up on YouTube too. But YouTube is, I've got a guy who's Jim, he used to make the Bolt videos back before Unity got Bolt. And he's been making some videos for me. So he's currently working on some really more like longer form tutorials on, just general game stuff and making cool games and cool projects. So hopefully we'll have a lot of those up shortly as well. So stuff not just from me, but from someone who's cooler at making cooler videos than I am.
What are you doing on Twitch, by the way?
Mostly just any like coding stuff, and also like if I'll be running through my demo scenes and stuff. If I got a new character, like when I was working on our environment we just put out, I'd be going through that and kind of demoing it, but then seeing if I can make my demo videos on Twitch and then just get that and make that into the demo video. So I'll run through that a couple times and kind of doing two things at once and whatnot.
It's cool. I've been thinking about streaming random stuff, but
yeah.
I don't know if anybody will watch it. When I randomly play video games and stuff and get bored, randomly code nonsense.
Yeah, I just have no idea what to like. Yeah, okay, there's programming stuff. I could do some videos on programming stuff, but like, I'm just trying to think about like what would I even do a channel on? Like headphones on, ranting about TV shows. I just don't know. I'd have to give some thought to what my actual identity of a channel would be, because as you've probably seen, I go off on tangents all of the time. So it's hard to figure out what that is.
Yeah, it's call it tangents, and that's it. It's just a new tangent.
Jason storytelling stories.
Yeah. I've been working on getting my YouTube channel going, but I've just been slow. But it's going to be a channel, basically 3D Sorcery is the name of it, and it's all 3D everything. 3D for games, 3D for printing, 3D just for fun, hacking my kids' toys with 3D stuff that I design, all that kind of stuff. So someday it will be launched, but you'll hear. I'm sure you'll hear about it.
That'd be sweet. Do you have some of your stuff up online right now people could check out, right?
Yeah, if you go to my Instagram, Instagram.com/3D Sorcery, you can see a lot of the stuff that I'm working on, and I've got links to some new stuff I'm doing on there as well. And that'll pretty much link out to the YouTube once that gets going. So got some pretty cool stuff. And then I've got the whole NFT action figures, launching that. Hopefully the first 3 are going to drop this week. It's looking like. So There'll be some cool stuff on my Instagram linking to that as well. So pretty interesting stuff. And hopefully I'll get one over to Jason so he can put it on his
Oh yeah, I want to put one back there.
drop that.
Cool. That'd be awesome. Yeah, everybody
too,
needs to go check it out because, like I said, his art is awesome. So
yeah, man. And Jason,
lots of shelf space here. Just
yeah. No worries. Send me your addresses. All you guys. I'll send some. Yeah,
like sure. 3-year delivery to Ireland though.
Yeah.
All good.
Struggle.
You're gonna get a nice big import duty on it.
Yeah.
This thing looks pretty pricey. By that Matt Newman guy.
Yeah. Who was it? 3D what? 3D something?
So there was a question that popped up that I told him go ahead and ask again about just how hard it is to connect with other developers and learn proper game dev stuff. So I guess this the guy looks like he's in the Caribbean, but I think anywhere where there's not just a big game development community already. I don't know if you guys have recommendations on like how to do that, how to like get the connections and meet people. Because I've always kind of been in a bubble of being in areas where I'm around game developers, or at least I'm not too far from game developers. There's always like a meetup or something within, an hour driving range. So I'm curious, like, I know Jason, you probably got experience like out in Ireland, and like, I don't know if either one of you guys have any ideas on like outside of doing things online.
Honestly, yeah, I've also been in the bubbles of where there's stuff. So I privilege in that regard. My first meetups for Unity Dev was actually at the Unity office, and they gave us pizza. So that was like made it easy. But, if I imagine living in a place where there doesn't seem to be other devs, there probably are other devs. There probably are people who are interested in it. So if nobody started one, then maybe that means you should start one. I know that that's a whole skill set in and of itself. But I would say if there's no one around you that you can find, put it out there and see if they can find you instead. And it might take a while. It might start with just 1 or 2 people showing up, and maybe someone be like, "Oh, I thought this was something different." But after a while, people, I think you can get that ball rolling for physical meetups.
This is definitely a good idea. That's how
and Jason, he'd always come. We had a meetup down here for Unity game devs for years, and then it kind of just trickled off. I think with COVID, it's still alive. We just haven't had any meetings for I think since pandemic.
COVID killed a lot of them.
Yeah. But I think the best, there's a lot of online meetups now that are starting to happen with even a lot of the meetup groups that are out there. They're doing these online kind of Zoom things and stuff like that, and that's a good way. It's really, you just got to get out there and just start joining them. That's how I started getting in with the community and finding devs and finding projects to work on. You just go to these meetups and have some pizza or whatever, or if it's an online one, go to the Zoom meeting and just start like talking to people. And you really, it's hard to kind of make waves or get noticed or find those people that you're going to work with unless you kind of put yourself out there and really kind of, go to these meetings, talk to people, work on, a lot of game jams are great. Game jams are huge. I met tons of people from different game jams over the years where we just, jammed on a project for a day and try to create something. But, you kind of create those relationships, right? And that's kind of the foundation of, building your network. So I think even Jason, I think we met at one of the meetups, I think initially. I think that's where it all started, right? So it's just doing that, right? And if there's nothing in your area, then do the online ones. Find ones that are online, and there's plenty of those now. I think everybody's doing them online. So, start there, and then maybe even do an online game jam. There's a ton of those too. Actually, a friend of mine was doing online game jams and meeting up with people, and they were just jamming on a project for a weekend. So that kind of stuff, I'd say start with for sure.
I think it's good. How did that? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so yes, you're right. As I'm in Ireland, where there is nothing for miles. It's basically getting connections going is a tough ask. But I've gotten pretty good at it for one main reason, which is like, despite what it may seem when you're on a channel like this talking to people, I'm pretty shy. I'm not that great in public talking to lots of people. But what I have learned is that you're a ton of people in a room, like we're all here with similar hobbies. Like all of you in the chat right now are here because you're vaguely interested in roughly the same stuff. And so what I find is if you join Discords and join groups, you can sort of just pay attention, find people who are talking about things they like and what they do. And then at some point you'll see somebody say something and you'll go, I can help them with that. I know a little bit about whatever it is they're doing. I know a way they can do that faster. I have a contact of somebody that I know that could help them out with this. And you just reach out and you just keep doing this. And some things will pay off, some won't. And you just make connections. Like for me, it's a lot more clinical. I actively just engage with trying to find ways that I can apply value to other people's lives. And that's how you make connections, right? It's your find value you can add to other people. And I've said this before about joining Discords. If you join the Discord with the sole intent of getting value from other people, if you're just asking questions all the time, you're not going to build any network because all you've demonstrated is that you ask questions, not that you answer them. If you join a community and help others, you are visibly demonstrating to other people that you're somebody worth working with because you're helpful. And so if you want to meet people, join lots of communities, help lots of people, and then eventually you'll meet people who need help with something and maybe they'll want to pay you. And then slowly but surely you move your way into doing paid work on various different topics. So there's not like a single trick. There's just generally be in lots of places. Join meetup.com is great to find meetups about particular topics that you like. You'll find in your area, there's various like programming meetups or game dev meetups or something. So just meet people and, try to be helpful.
You can also create them on there for free. You can go in there, create your own meetup, and start getting people in there. I've done it myself, and I highly recommend it. Matt, how did you start the meetup, or how did that meetup that you were running get started? I don't know.
That's super interesting. So for a couple of years, Unity had an official like meetup down here, right? We're in Orange County, right? And I was going to every meeting. I think it was like twice a month or something like that. They were doing it, or once a month. And we had grown the group from like 12 people to like, probably 50, 60 at that time. And then Unity was also growing too. The company was getting bigger, and a lot of their resources they had to kind of keep back more at Unity, so they weren't sending people down as much. And I'd gone to so many meetings, I kind of said, hey, well, I'll just take it over and I'll just start running it and we'll just start doing meetings. And so for years, we just started keeping the same group and doing meetings, and I just took over the meetup and that was it. And then it grew to like a couple thousand from there. But it would be nice, for the world to open back up again so we can start doing those, because those were fun, man. Those were good times. For sure.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to them again.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think going to those is a lot of developers are very shy and fall in that same camp of, oh shoot, I'm surrounded by people. We all have imposter syndrome. We all feel like we don't know enough. But honestly, just be honest, be open, be nice, don't be mean, don't pick fights. This goes for online too, but just be nice and be open. Realize, hey, everyone else in that room is looking at you the way you're looking at them. For the most part, everyone has something to offer and everyone has something to learn from other people, and just being open to that, I think, is the number one thing to get value out of that. And by participating in that community, you'll find people who, you never knew you existed. And suddenly you're like, wow, I've learned so much from just this one little interaction that, and all I was just so shy before.
Oh yeah. I used to go to the things and just like hide in the back, like sit all the way in the back, hiding out. Like, yeah. I had to like force myself to go sit up in the front at first when I'd go to meetups, or it wasn't even at first, probably like after like a year or so, force myself to just kind of like sit up in the front and pay attention and ask questions and like engage a little bit. But as you do it, like you just talk to one person and then suddenly you see that person the next time and it's a lot easier, right? Like, hey, I know that guy. I'm going to go talk to that guy. And then that group suddenly slowly grows and grows and grows. So it's a very, very important thing to do, to just have some sort of networking.
I remember like a personal embarrassing moment is I was at the Vive Game Jam in London. So this was the time Valve had a limited amount of dev kits. Now I already had one at home, but that's beside the point. They're at this meetup where they had an event where it was like, if you don't have one, we have a whole bunch of people come in, do a game jam, and you can like play with the ones here, and we'll all make games using the same hardware. And they set up like a whole bunch of rooms with different headsets. It was awesome. And I remember while I was there, I was, working on the game jam stuff. There was a guy walking around with a camera. And I was just like, oh, hey, walked over and said hello to him. And turns out the guy was a Reddit user that I had seen him post games that I had downloaded and played. Because way back at the early days of VR, people were making these like really crappy Unity demos and just like dumping them into the subreddit. And they're all hard, just like white box, whatever, but they're experiments. And this one guy called Teddy, Teddy OK was his username. He made like weird experimental stuff. Like he put one VR controller on his head because at the time there was no head tracking, and he had this game where like you'd lean down, and as you crouched, it was like a tower defense game, and the world would scale up as you shrunk down, so you could place units, and then as you stood up, it would be like a mini table size thing. And so it was really disorienting, but it was really cool. It was like, this is creative, out of the box thinking. There's like really fun stuff. And I remember I was like full on like really, oh my gosh, I love your stuff, it's great, and I was really giddy and awkward and uncomfortable. And then he's just like, yeah, and he was just a guy. And he was like, I could see it in his eyes. He was like, why is this guy like, why is he impressed by me? I'm just a guy who makes some random stuff on the internet. And it really clicked in my head. I was like, this is like, we're just people. Just like, and for that moment, it was really funny to me how he had no concept of like the impact of the stuff he was doing. With other people were out there trying it and being impressed by it. And in the same vein, I was seeing him as some sort of big time developer or whatever, but he's just a guy just doing the same thing I was. So I don't know. It's a very humanizing experience, and it really made me think about that relationship with random people. It's just like, you're just random people,
Totally. If you ever meet a famous person, like an actor, someone like really famous, don't ask for an autograph. Instead, just say, "Oh, hi," and start a conversation. You might be surprised that they want to talk and just have a conversation, and you'll get way more out of it and a better story than a signature on a piece of paper.
Totally.
You got to pull down your shirt, Jason, unbutton it, and ask him to sign.
There's a great story from the comedian. What's his name? I forgot which comedian said it, but basically, Jimmy Carr. It was Jimmy Carr. He was saying how he'd do a show, and there'd be a bunch of people who would wait outside to kind of meet him and get an autograph afterwards. And he says one thing that would happen so frequently, it was really bizarre, is like there'd be people outside, it would be pouring rain and horrible, but there's people like sitting outside the door for him to come out to get his autograph. And then when he comes out, they would act all aloof, like they were like, oh, here, sign this. Like, and it was so funny because they're trying so hard not to like be dramatically a fan, but they're standing out in the rain for hours waiting to see him. So you like, obviously they're a fan. And so it's this weird disconnect of that sort of parasocial relationship. It's really funny to see how people have a really hard time engaging. And my worst one ever was when I met Bob Martin, Uncle Bob. I met him once, and I literally stammered, got halfway through a sentence, and I just walked backwards. I can't finish my sentence because what I was trying to say was his book had changed the way I think about programming, and to me that was like a big thing. It's not a fan from like him as a person. It was the fact that when I read his book, my brain changed. It's like the way I process information. I thought about code differently, and I thought that's one of the coolest things a person can do. They can give you the gift of like making you process things differently. And I couldn't say that. I had no way of like phrasing it. And my colleagues were there laughing at me as because I'm normally relatively loud with people I know. And so having me like mumble, stammer, and then walk out the door embarrassingly they got a great kick out of that.
At least you got up close and got part of the question out. Man. I thought about asking Carmack a question when I met him in person. I wanted to talk to him. And I was like, I just turned around. I was like, I'm going to go do something else. I was like, I'm going to go eat and try not to throw up.
I met Carmack too because he was a big part of the whole VR community too. So that was awesome.
Yeah, that was at a VR thing. I was like, oh man. Yeah, I'd probably be the same with Uncle Bob. I
actually have a funny Carmack story too. I was at this VR OC2 event, and there was a whole bunch of us in a circle, and I was with a guy, Rev Kyle, and he was with a friend of his, and she's a porn star, and she was doing like VR porn stuff. And she was like fangirling over Carmack, going, oh, I want to meet him and say hello and stuff. And so there was like a circle of people, because wherever Carmack goes, there's a circle of people just listening to him. And she went up and started saying, oh, hi, I'm a big fan and stuff. And because it's VR, most people there do VR, he kind of asked the obvious question. It's like, what do you do? And she's like, I do VR porn. And then Carmack asks, what kind? And then she sort of stammers awkwardly. It's like, And then she's like, "Oh, yeah." She said, "I do VR videos. What kind? Oh, porn." And then Carmack, completely unfazed, just goes, "No, what kind of VR?" Because at the time, this was like the advent of 360 videos versus different stitching techniques. And he had no interest in the concept of it being porn. He was super fascinated as to exactly what form of technology she was using for the VR stuff. And it was just a funny moment where the whole room was just like, there was like missed a beat on how Carmack was like processing the conversation. It was very funny.
That's awesome.
That's good stuff. Cool. I don't know. I think we've been going for a while, guys, and probably about ready to wrap it up. There were a couple more questions in chat, but there were a lot about design and stuff, and we probably just hit them next week. I don't know if you guys.
There's just one last question I want to just touch on because it came up a couple times. It's a very quick one. Someone said, "When should I announce my game? When should I release an idea?"
Yeah.
The answer is already. You should have already done whatever it is you're doing for your game. If you talk to anybody who's released a successful game, and if you, spoiler alert, follow any of the courses, the first three, that course, the Thomas Brush's Game Dev Guide one, I've watched all of those courses, and them and other people will all tell you the same thing, which is wish lists are king. If you want to actually make money as a game dev, you need wish lists. And every moment your game is available on Steam is moments you can be accruing wish lists. And if you don't, you won't be. So it doesn't matter how great or secret your idea is or how big of a launch you want to make. The fact of the matter is, if you want to make money, you want a lot of wish lists. And so you want to have your game out there and wish listable even before you've like finished it. Just like put it out now, make a Steam page, start advertising it, and then continue working on it. So already is the answer to that question.
Yeah, definitely agree. You want to get it out there, share it, and we should get a couple people on here to talk about that sometime. Done releases recently. It'd be interesting. Talk about that whole process.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I might take your advice there.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I just wanted to share with everybody real quick that I got a premiere kicking off in, I think it's set for 15 minutes from now. I'm going to change it to kick off at noon. And then just about singletons. Jason, you'll hate it. Just talking about why I might not hate them so much. I think our discussion, yeah, it was our discussion last week. I think kind of inspired it, or the week before. Inspired me to record a little video about why I don't necessarily hate them. Because I used to be very anti-singletons, and so that's coming up. So I just linked it in the chat. Make sure that if you haven't already clicked on it, you go over there and click on it and hit thumbs up and just have it queued up. So at the very least, YouTube will be happy about it, right? And make sure that you hit the thumbs up button on this video and share it. And if you have questions and stuff, make sure that you drop them down in the comments below too. And I hopefully like to have everybody on here come back some more and talk about stuff. But I don't know if there are anything else you guys wanted to just talk about or mention before we wrapped it up.
I think I'm good. Check out 3D Sorcerer on Instagram. That's me.
Yes, yeah, you definitely got to check out Matt's stuff because it is pretty damn impressive.
Oh, thanks, man.
Thank you. I'm gonna start bugging you to make me smart, actually.
So I just tasked Jason there to post that link. So I don't have a YouTube channel properly set up yet, but I've decided I'm going to start putting my updates of whatever I'm doing on there. Ko-fi.com, that's my name, or / my name. So feel free to follow me on that, and I'll let you know. So that's the closest to updates I can give you until I've finally figured my own stuff out.
Cool. All right. Well, I just dropped in a bunch of links in chat too for everybody to go check out. All right. Yeah. If anybody's got anything else, just again drop comment, questions down there and stuff. And I guess we'll see you next week or later on this week, or I guess in just a couple minutes at the premiere of that video that I need to change over to start sooner.
All right, guys.
All right. Well, thanks again, everybody, for coming out. And thanks everybody for watching and sharing the video and all that stuff.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks.
Pleasure as always.